Hello, and you're listening to Your Majesty's Secret Podcast. I like my podcast shaken, not stirred. Only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. If you'd like to check out more shows, go to foureyedradio.com.
Hey there, Eric here from Socially Awkward Studios, and this Four-Eyed Radio presentation is being proudly brought to you by Raven Designs, illustration and design that fit your personality. For samples and inquiries, visit ravencruise.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my web 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley from Cinema on the Rocks. And with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios. And you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. Yes, that's right, this is the show where we talk about bondage. James Bondage. And today is a very special day if you're hearing us on the first day we dropped the episode, because it is 7-7. Ooh, how's that for all those numerology fans out there?
7-7-14, which can be divided into 7 2 times. Whoa, I don't know.
But hey, 7-7 for a podcast about 007. I'll take it.
We do like playing with the number 7 here, so it works out well. So if you're listening to us on release day, hey, thanks, first of all, for being one of the people who jumps on right away. We do appreciate that. We know there's some of you out there, because when we missed a week like we did a couple weeks back, we were told.
And we appreciate that, because we don't try to miss weeks. It's just sometimes life gets in the way, illness gets in the way, or other things like that. So we do appreciate that you check up on us, because we're here for you.
Absolutely. No, yeah, it was definitely heartening to see those messages pop up. Being like, hey, you guys got an episode coming? What's up? Well, it's like, yeah, on the one hand, it makes it sound like, okay, what are we just here for your amusement? But no, really, that's what we're here for. So it's okay.
Yeah, and if you ever do want to drop us a message, whether it's about, hey, where were you guys? Or, hey, you guys are nuts. Or, hey, you guys rock. Can I send you a check?
Especially
we
like
haven't had one of those happen yet, but hey, if you want to be the first, please do that. And you can do that by emailing me directly. I am Ziggy at cinemaontherocks.com. You can also hit me up on Twitter at cinemaotr.
And I'm available via email at eric@hermajestiespod.com or on the Twitters at Eric J. Dewey. And, of course, follow the show on Twitter at hermajestiespod. Give us a like over on Facebook. That's facebook.com/hermajestiespod. If you sense a trend here, it's because we did it on purpose. We definitely want to make it as easy as possible. If you remember Her Majesty's Pod, you'll probably find 90% of our online presence.
And, of course, our main website is hermajestiespod.com.
It is indeed. Makes it, like I said, makes it easy. You just remember that one little slug, and then boom, you found all of our social media. So do it. Find us. Stalk us. We like it.
Well, just limit the stalking,
Electronic stalking only, please. But,
Yeah. But today we're going to be getting evil. We will be discussing the evil schemes of the evil villains of 007, and we will also be talking about some of their manifestos and vision statements, and of course great speeches about why they're doing what they're doing. And we're going to be kicking things off with something very special just for Eric.
Woohoo!
That would be the top 007 evil uses of animals in the James Bond universe, or as I've called it just for Eric, the Shark List.
Dun-dum, dun-dum. Yeah, so everybody knows by now, if they've been listening to the show, that I'm a big fan of the villainous use of sharks in the Bond movies. I've even given certain movies, certain villains, extra points when doing lists just because of their use of sharks in their plots, whether it be peripheral or whether it be a main thing that they do. I love those sharks. And So Ziggy was kind enough to give me this special list, which is pretty much going to be mostly sharks. I'm going to tell you now, guys, it's going to be mostly sharks. But I do have a couple of surprises in there. If you were thinking it was going to be all sharks, you will be surprised. But other than that, I can't wait.
I will say that I did not go quite as shark heavy as Eric. I know, you're all shocked, aren't you? But I decided to have some fun with it. So, would you like to start, or shall I start on our top 007 evil uses of the animal kingdom?
Well, I'll go ahead and go. My number 7. We're going to go 7-1, right? I'm assuming?
Yes.
All right, like we usually do. So my number 7, my number 007 evil use of animals in a Bond film goes to Blofeld's piranha in You Only Live Twice, which were, of course, brilliantly used to kill Brandt for her failure. If there's one thing I like almost as much as sharks, it's teeny tiny fish that act like sharks. So Blofeld's piranha had to end up on this list. If they'd have been bigger and more shark-like, they might have made it higher than number 7. But for where they were, they definitely make a place on this list, and so that is my number 7, Blofeld's piranha.
All right. Now, when I considered this list, I considered that, the animal didn't necessarily have to have been used the way the villain intended. The villain just had to put it there, or a villain had to just put it there, and then whatever happened. And if the animal didn't end up actually getting used as the villain intended, well, oh well.
Right.
So anyone who has heard even more than 2 episodes of our podcast has got to know what's going to somehow end up on my list. And so in the place of honor, at number 007, you love chickens.
I didn't even honestly, I didn't even think of the chickens. I can't believe that. I can't believe it. It totally slipped my mind. I'm doing this list, and I didn't even think chicken once.
Because you may never see the chicken. However, if you really pay attention to the movie, the plot was to destroy the food supply of at very least Great Britain, if not all of Western Europe.
Right,
and one of the means by which it was going to be done was by transmitting a virus to poison all of the chickens. And it was going to be done by a Judas chicken.
All right, on number 6.5 on my list, we're going to have Blofeld's chickens. No, I'm just kidding. No, I didn't even think of that, because I went more for the literal, the animals may not have behaved exactly as were expected by the villain, but at least the physical animals were present or known to exist right there. Like, we may not have actually seen them do the dirty work, but we know that they... anyways. But no, totally fair, and I can't believe I missed that. So, good pull.
You love chickens. Yeah, because we definitely knew they were there. We may never have seen them, but he talked about them so much.
We did see them getting
eaten. And of course, we've given them even more airtime, so I had to give the chickens a place of honor.
I concur with that. I question my own judgment for not having placed the chickens on the list. And we did see chicken. We did see her eating some chicken, which she was previously quote unquote allergic to. But she loves all chickens, and she wants no harm to come to the chickens. But she loves eating them too. Does she know how it gets from live chicken to on her plate chicken? Is she aware of the process?
Well, if it's dead, she wants to make sure that she becomes one with the chicken, and the chicken one with her.
Ew.
It's like cannibalistic funeral practices.
She absorbs the chicken's powers. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
If I eat enough of these, I'll be able to fly very, very short distances.
It's the chicken quickening.
It's really more of a jump than a flight, but, still.
Yes. So that was my number 007. Moving on to number 006. One that I almost forgot, but as soon as I remembered it, I'm like, this is just too... I wouldn't really want this to happen, but this was just too cool and kind of unexpected to leave off the list once I thought about it. And that would be the drive-by snake from Never Say Never Again.
When
Phantom of Blush takes a snake, tosses it out the car window into another guy's car, causing him to go into an accident and flip over.
It's a drive-by snaking. Somebody better get this mother-trucking snake out of this mother-trucking car. No? All right.
So, Drive-By Snake from Never Say Never Again gets my number 6.
And yet, so both of yours thus far have been ones that I completely forgot about. I like the Drive-By Snake, though. Definitely a good villainous use of an animal.
And the snake even made it out alive, because she pulled the snake out before she blew up the car.
That is true. Well, she wants to be able to reuse it. I mean, whenever you have a snake that's trained to fly through a car window and cause an accident, you want to get it back.
Indeed.
All right, moving on to number 6 on my list, I have Mr. Big, or Kananga's crocodiles from Live and Let Die. You thought I was going to go straight to sharks, didn't you? But nope, we're still not to sharks yet. The crocs, even though they totally didn't do their job, they were still there and very cool. And I think a good one of the better scenes from that movie. We get to see something fun when Bond tries to use one of his gadgets, and it just doesn't quite work out for him. He has to find something else.
Damn it! Somebody had to tie up the boat.
Yeah. What the? Oh, darn it. Yeah, so you get to see a little bit of quick thinking on Bond's part. He's like, "Oh, I got this. I got my magnet watch. All right. Oh, darn. Okay, let's plan B." And yes, like I said, even though they did not, had they accomplished their mission, had they gotten a chunk of him, maybe they might have made it even higher on my list. But for what they did and did not accomplish in this particular scene, I still give them a place on my list at number 6.
Well, to be fair, Bond did turn their purpose around, and they went after the villains. So I thought that was nicely done. And then there are 2 other important things worth pointing out. One, in case you didn't notice, they love chickens. They love chickens. Because what did he do? He threw them raw roasted chickens. Well, not raw, but just, he didn't go cook them again. They were just, stripped, cleaned, and so he threw them chickens. That is what they ate. So they love chickens. And trivia for those who did not already know, which would mean that they didn't listen to our episode yet where we discussed Live and Let Die, go back and do that. Check out our archives. You can get to all of our episodes from HerMajesty'sPod.com, because the ones we have on Spreaker and so on, they do fall off after a while just because they only give us a limited amount of space, so eventually the older episodes go.
Yeah.
But if you listen to us on those platforms, and we appreciate that you do, you can always go back to HerMajesty'sPod.com and find the full archive.
Yes. Yeah, we always keep the full, both on HerMajesty'sPod.com and on the main site, 4eyeradio.com. You can find the full archives of all of our shows there.
And for those who missed the Live and Let Die episode, you'll also know that the crocodile farm was something that they just happened to stumble upon and drive by and decided that they wanted to use it in the film. And the man who owned the crocodile farm was named Kananga, which is how Mr. Big got his alternate identity in the script for Live and Let Die, as appreciation for the gentleman who owned the croc farm.
Yes, indeed.
So there's your extra bit of trivia. And now, Eric, what do you have for number 5 on your list?
At number 5, drumroll. No, we're finally getting in to the meat of the issue here. We're getting to the sharks. That's right. Number 5 on my list specifically is Largo's sharks from Thunderball. Brilliantly used to kill a henchman who failed him. I love this trend of bad guys using animals to kill their own people just because they messed up one time. I mean, good help is hard to find, I guess, but yeah, these sharks were trained. Bonus points go to these sharks for actually putting Sean Connery's life in danger at different points of filming. So that's always fun as well. A little tidbit there. But yeah, Largo sharks, while not the best sharks used in the Bond franchise, definitely had to make my list, and all the way up to number 5. So there you have it.
All right. Well, I suppose if you're in this franchise and not in the one that allows you to force choke people when they cause you problems, then, sharks are a good thing to have. So as far as my number 5, still not a shark. Still nothing that's been on your list. Uh-oh. No, we have the Komodo dragon from Skyfall. Why?
Yes.
Because it's a Komodo dragon. You never see these anywhere. And I think that's unfortunate. I mean, really, the only other place I've seen it, there's a really bad low-budget movie from around 2000 that was based on them, and it was really, really, really bad. And Komodo dragons are just freaking cool. So the Komodo dragon at the Golden Dragon Casino was just way too cool for me to not put on this list somewhere.
I can see that, and while it did not make my list, I can see that. I think the reason I kind of skipped over that, I did think about that one. That's not at least one that I didn't completely forget about. I just chose not to put it on my list. It seemed it was too close to me to the Bantha scene in that other franchise we were just talking about a moment ago. While it was a cool throwback, I didn't think it was original enough to make my list personally, but it was a fun scene in both franchises, actually.
Yeah, so Komodo Dragon, just because Komodo Dragon.
They were cool. Do you happen to know, were those real Komodo dragons that were used, or was that CG?
I think it was actually a Komodo dragon, though I am not 100% positive. But I believe it was real.
Yeah, I've never looked into that. I'm going to have to double check on that, because if it was CG, it was fantastic, because it didn't look CG at all.
Yeah, I think it was real, and with the way the camera work was done, it would be very easy to have a real Komodo dragon in those scenes without it really being harmful to the actors, possibly. So,
right. All right.
But that was my number 5 from Skyfall. And then at number 4, still not a swimming animal.
Oh, jeez. You're killing me,
But
Smalls.
there are lots of these animals, and that would be the coffin full of snakes from Live and Let Die. Because, hey, if you're going to off somebody, there's no better way to do it than to shove them into a coffin full of snakes and shut the lid. That's just nasty.
I would definitely say Mr. Big made very good use of animals throughout that entire film. He's got 2 spots on my list, and obviously a spot on your list, at least one. So, and different ones, like different. Each one is a different one. So you can tell that he was definitely the animal guy of the Bond villains.
Well, it's
thus far.
a voodoo thing. So.
Yeah. I will admit the snakes specifically didn't make my list. I did think about them, but again, I already had 2 of Kananga's beasts on my list, so I couldn't put a third one from the same movie on just a 7 list. I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Fair enough. So what did you put at your number 4, sir?
At my number 4 is, big surprise, a shark. Actually, a couple of sharks, I believe, and those would be Kananga's sharks from Live and Let Die, who were intended to be the death of Bond in Solitaire, and didn't quite work out that way for him because, I mean, come on, you know Bond's not going to go out like that. Someday he might die, but it's not going to be tied to a beautiful woman eaten by sharks. Actually, you know what? That doesn't sound like such a bad way to go after all. Well, either way, it didn't happen this time. And so while it was a good idea, it didn't quite pan out the way Kananga wanted. But I still love the drama of it, and that's one of those scenes that always gets brought up in just about any parody. The tied up and slowly lowered into a shark tank, and of course, instead of watching you die by these sharks, I'm going to walk away and go do something else, giving you time to escape. It's one of those tropes that this is where it started, and so for that reason, more than anything else, it lands a spot right in the middle of my list.
Though to be fair, he didn't walk away. He stood there to watch, which was a bad idea on his part.
Yeah. Sometimes these villains they just get a big head about things, huh?
Oh, ow, that hurts. So what do you have at number 3, sir? I question your humor.
At number 3, I have this time I'm going to get a little different. This time, instead of the animal that you think I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about a shark. Oh wait, that was probably what you thought I was going to talk about. In this case, I'm going to be talking about Sanchez's sharks from License to Kill, specifically because they were used to finally get around to doing something that was done in the books much earlier, and that is eating half of Felix Leiter. While that's not a good thing in and of itself, it is nice that they finally decided to, hey, you know what, this is the thing that happened in the books, and it's like kind of a big thing. Like, it's pointed out over and over and over again every time Leiter shows up. He's kind of chopped up. He disagreed with something that ate him. And the fact that they finally found a way to bring that into the movies, even though it wasn't in the same movie as it was in the books, they get a special place just for that. And so I don't wish any harm to Felix Leiter, but it was good that it finally, kind of caught up with the books a little bit in that respect. So, number 3, Sanchez's shark from License to Kill.
I can't disagree with it being on your list. I'm just kind of shocked. That's all I'll say at the moment.
All right.
Meanwhile, for my number 3, it was obviously thrown into the movie as a bit of a pun visually for people who actually get the joke, and I think Eric's going to know exactly which one I'm talking about.
I think I know. Maybe. We'll see.
And that would be Jaws on Jaws action.
Yes.
From The Spy Who Loved Me, where you have, in this corner, Jaws,
Dun.
played by Richard Kiel,
wrong one.
with giant metal teeth. And in this tank, Jaws, a shark, where you have them thrown together, and in a twist of fate, it's Jaws with the metal teeth who bites Jaws the shark and wins.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very glad this one made your list because it's definitely on my list, and you'll notice we haven't talked about it yet. So,
I have a suspicion about what's going to happen here, but we'll see.
All right.
But yes, I absolutely had to have it on the list, and honestly, the top three were really close. So this could actually have ended up at any of my top three spots, but it ended up at number 3. Oh. Jaws on Jaws action from The Spy Who Loved Me.
That's hot.
Ain't it though? Meanwhile, we go from sharks to something that's definitely not a shark, but which to me, if there's a place of honor for best animal of all, just in toto for the entire James Bond series, it's the animal featured in this particular thing, at least in part of it, because we're talking about the really only if you may or may not catch it as a dirty joke, it's up to you, but wrong pussy from Diamonds Are Forever. Yes, I'm talking about Blofeld's cat. And the greatest animal in all of James Bond filmdom, bar none. And in many alternate versions, the actual boss of Spectre. And in this particular use, very cleverly done, when Blofeld makes exact duplicates of himself, he gives them also other cats, just like his. And that is the undoing of James Bond's plan to figure out who the real Blofeld is, because, of course, he kicks the wrong cat, so the cat goes to the wrong Blofeld, and he shoots the wrong Blofeld. Which is interesting, because that also means that the cat's imprinted loyalty on whichever Blofeld was theirs. So, but I thought that was very cleverly done. I don't like that he kicked the cat, but the cat was relatively unharmed, walked away. So, and that's one thing I like. Blofeld's cat has never been killed. So, at least not that we've ever noticed. Yeah. So, I'm good with that. No harm to the cat.
Yeah, even in For Your Eyes Only, when we're assuming that it's Blofeld that is dropped into the smokestack by Bond at the beginning of the film, it can't be actually named or shown because they don't have the rights to Blofeld at the time. But everybody knows it's Blofeld, especially since guess who you see walking around is this pretty white cat.
So, my choice for number 2, specifically in the instance from Diamonds Are Forever, but my favorite animal from the entire series, wrong pussy, Blofeld's cat.
I will say that particular incarnation did not make my list, but I don't disagree with you in total. So
what do you have at number 2?
At number 2, I have some hot, steamy Jaws on Jaws action. Stromberg Sharks from The Spy Who Loved Me, of course, losing in a Jaws on Jaws battle to Jaws. It was just a fun moment, even though I don't want to see any harm come to the sharks. But at the same time, it's to see the shark facing off against, mostly human and losing is just a fun scene. And the pun, of course, of Jaws on Jaws, it's too good to pass up. So it had to make my list, and it had to be pretty high on the list, which is why I made it all the way to number 2.
All right. So then what did make it to number 1, sir?
Number 1 is probably I think the actual best moment of a animal on film in a Bond movie, and this is something that a lot of people may have missed the first time through because it's not a focal point at all. It's actually more of an outtake than anything, but it's hilarious, and it makes me...
Oh, I bet I know which one it is.
And it makes me laugh every time I see it. And if you want to, you don't have to watch the whole movie to see it, but you can just Google this and watch it on YouTube. It is absolutely hilarious, and that would be Blofeld's cat in You Only Live Twice specifically, where the cat actor playing the part of Blofeld's cat just ain't having it. There's a scene where there's a small explosion off to the side, and the cat is freaking out. And the actor playing Blofeld is like trying desperately to hold on to the cat and make it look like he's still just calm and stroking it, but that cat wants nothing to do with that scene and is trying to get out. And its eyes, at one point, it's just bug-eyed, like, get me out of here. It is absolutely hilarious and just a fantastic moment. And the fact that they just played it. They just kept going. They just played it straight as if it didn't happen. Like, cat's fine. Don't worry about the cat. It's cool. So for me, that was the best moment of animal action in a Bond movie, and it happened to be a Bond villain's animal at that. And so my number one, surprisingly, not a shark. It is, in fact, Blofeld's cat, specifically the scene from You Only Live Twice where he's just not having it.
I admit being surprised. Very surprised. For two reasons. One, I thought it would be a shark. And I thought it would be one of two specific moments. And it was neither one.
Uh-oh.
So I thought it would either be the Jaws on Jaws action for you.
Okay.
Or I thought it would be my choice for number one, which you already mentioned. He disagreed with something that ate him. The shark basically mowing down on Felix Leiter. Like you, I don't want to see harm come to Felix, but it is a classic pivotal moment in the James Bond franchise. And just, to me, I couldn't have picked anything else. It's just that standout of a signature moment. The shark just chewing up Felix. I mean, poor Felix, but it's such an important moment in the film, in the franchise, and recalling one of the most important moments from all the books. So he disagreed with something that ate him. It's my choice for number one from License to Kill.
Yeah, like I said, it's one of those things that it's like they finally caught, like I don't know, whoever was writing that movie said, you know what, there's a thing that happened way back in the books and they just never did it in the movies, but we should play catch up at this point and make sure that this this happens to perpetrate the storyline properly. And so it was an important moment. So that's why I definitely made my list. For me, the Jaws on Jaws action had to be above that, but at the same time, all three of my top three, I would say, are very close to each other. So, like you, they could have been flipped around fairly easily without too much trouble.
And then for honorable mentions, these weren't really villainous, which is why they weren't in consideration on my list, but there were two other animal moments that really kind of stuck out for me as really fun, and I enjoy them whenever I see them.
Okay.
One of them was manufactured, and the other one was completely unplanned. Manufactured would be in Moonraker, when Bond takes the gondola out of the canal and suddenly it's a parade float going down the street, and you have the triple take of the pigeon. I just thought that was hilarious, done in time to the music. That was funny. I like watching that. It brings a smile to my face whenever I see it. And then from Thunderball, during the parade, a dog lifts its leg right in the middle of the parade. It was just a random dog. It wasn't supposed to be there. It just showed up, and they kept it in the dailies as a joke, but everybody liked it so much that it made the finished film. So, the peeing dog.
The peeing dog. Oh, yeah.
Honorable mention. Even though he's not villainous, he's funny.
Always, it's one of those things that you don't really think about it sometimes when you have these big scenes with a lot of people, and then, stray animal happens to wander in, and if it makes the cut, it makes the cut. And that's just one of those moments. If it had just wandered by, nobody would have even cared. But because I'm thinking it stopped, saw the camera, said, something's going on here. I think I better pee. Because that's what dogs do. Something's happening. I better pee. Oh, look, somebody I know. Better pee. That's pretty much how dogs think. That's kind of their motto.
I can think of some people who act that way too, which is really scary. Especially when they're past infancy. However, that brings an end to the shark list, which Eric did not top off with a shark, much to my shock.
But
shark
to
and
be
awe,
fair,
as it were.
Out of 7, there were 4 sharks, so it was very shark heavy. The majority of my list was in fact sharks, so I did keep somewhat true to my nature there.
And there were other carnivorous fish as well, so you went very fish heavy.
Yes, definitely amphibious on that one. Yeah. A pussy had to be at the top of the list, though.
Yeah, well, it is for so many people. But that brings us to our main event, which is Megalomania! The evil schemes that are the main evil schemes from the 23 Eon films, plus Never Say Never Again. Now, I want to draw a very major distinction here, because the major evil scheme is not always what people consider the central plot of the movie. And, there is at least one film, possibly more, depending on your opinion, where the villain doesn't drive the plot at all. And then there are others where the thing that everyone remembers most and the thing that most people hinge on is not the actual major plot, it's a subplot that takes over. So there's some interesting places to go with this. And we considered it for a while, but Eric and I decided that we weren't going to compare notes for what we thought the plot was as far as what the main evil scheme was. So there may or may not be disagreement here. I'm not sure. It disturbs me to think that Eric has admitted to using Wikipedia in determining some of these things.
Not in determining them per se, but just for my notes to kind of put something in there to remind me. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
And as always, Eric took something more of a mathematical spreadsheet approach, which he'll explain in a moment. I always wing it, and I tend to flavor mine very much as favorites. Not always. I put some calculation into there, but I do lean more heavily toward favorite than calculated because I honestly don't think there's such a thing as a best list. I think that that's kind of a fallacy because there's so many variables in it, especially when you're talking about art like movies.
Yeah.
So
it's all subjective.
For me, best is somewhat in the science of it, but a lot of it comes to favorites and how well it plays out.
Yeah.
So,
and even though I use my spreadsheet and I have my categories, it still comes down to I'm assigning points based on my personal feelings about it. So it is completely subjective. I'm not claiming that my way is any less subjective than yours in any way, shape, or form. It just makes it easier for me to visualize the list while I'm creating it to give it categories to assign points to instead of just, lumping it just, okay, is this one my favorite or is this one my favorite? Well, let me think. I like this about it, but I don't like this about it, but I do like this about it. And that's kind of where I come up with my figures. Yeah, I use numbers and calculations and whatnot, but I don't claim this to be an objective list in any way, shape, or form. This is definitely my personal opinion list, just with some numbers thrown in.
So with that in mind, how would you like to start the personal opinion list? Would you like to go first, or shall I?
You go. I think I started the shark list, so why don't you go ahead and start us off with the villainous plot list?
All right. So we're going from 24 to 1. One thing that I noticed as I went about this list, man, I mean, I love these movies. I love the series. I love the villains and so on. But if you take some of these schemes all by themselves, man, there's a lot of bad ones. Or at least dull or boring or whatever. And what I started with at number 24, and all these descriptions, I tried to come up with a description of what the plot of what the major scheme was in a short phrase. And this is Steel Auction Solar Energy Prototype, and that is from The Man with the Golden Gun. Yes, the movie is not... The scheme actually isn't to have a duel between Scaramanga and Bond. That's a subplot.
Yes.
What he's actually trying to do is steal the energy prototype and then auction it off for cash. So he can just retire to his private island and shoot down Cessnas when they crash land on the beach.
Yes.
And
for
to
funsies.
me, this just felt like a tacked-on thing, and it kind of was, because behind the scenes, there was a lot of infighting during the production of Man with the Golden Gun, and so when it looks kind of slapped together, it kind of is. And it seemed really just kind of half-assed the way it was thrown into the movie, and you could see the subplot took over, which I'm glad it did, because the subplot's much better. But overall, just the solar energy prototype, the Solex Agitator, just... It felt like, okay, let's just read the headlines. Energy crisis, okay, what can we do? Yeah, we'll just kind of plug and play. It just felt lazy. It felt half-baked.
Big on solar right now. How can we take advantage of that?
Yeah, so it just did nothing for me. So that's why The Man with the Golden Gun Steel Auction Solar Energy Prototype made it all the way at the bottom at number 24.
Okay. I will say that I do agree with what you consider the villainous plot of that. I didn't go with the major over-theme of the movie itself. I went with that as the plot for that one. I will say it did make it a little bit higher on my list because I did add a little bit to it. So when we get there, I will explain myself. But I will say that it's definitely not top 5, top 10, anything like that. It's just a little bit higher on my list than you chose to put it. That's all.
Fair enough. So what do you have at the bottom of your barrel?
All right. Starting at the bottom of my list. And real quick, I will kind of explain the process I used when creating my list. First of all, I did take all the movies, just listed them out, and then I put in what I thought the villainous plot was of that movie, and then I categorized them based on their plausibility, their wackiness, so one could easily score high in plausibility, but be really boring and thus not wacky, and not get very many points in there. I also gave them points on how far along I think they actually got. How much of their plot did they actually complete before being foiled by Bond? I also gave points based on whether or not the plot itself was interesting. Was it an interesting plot? Whether, it may not have been plausible, it may not have been that wacky, but was it interesting? And then I also gave points based on its sensibility. Was the whole idea, was the outcome, the desired outcome of this plot actually sensible in any way, shape, or form? Many of the plots were not in any way, and others were very sensible. If everything had played out exactly as planned, the outcome would have been very good for that villain, and thus it was a sensible plot. They weren't weighted equally. I'm not going to claim that. And again, all of these were completely subjective, based on my own interpretations of the plot.
What? You didn't include any points for sharks?
I did not, and only because we were doing the separate shark list. Otherwise, there would have been a 1 point, a single binary yes, no, on off type point attributed to whether or not their plan involved sharks. But I chose to leave that off this time because we were doing the separate shark list on this episode, and I already used the shark point when we actually listed the villains in the villain episode. So I chose to leave it off this time, actually. But to start my actual list, what landed on the bottom of my list is mostly because it just... The evil plot, I thought, just kind of bored me. Now, I don't want to say that the movie was boring, because this is actually one of those movies that I find is very underrated. It's a good movie. It's a fun movie to watch, and unfortunately, it's one of the ones that kind of gets forgotten by a lot of people, even other Bond fans. And that is The Living Daylights. I thought the Pushkin specifically. I didn't go with Whitaker. I went with Pushkin's. Excuse me. Yes, that's what I meant. At least I got the right movie. This is one of those situations again. Koskov, wanting to kill Pushkin and basically try to... It was so convoluted. He got some points for wackiness because it was just like, where are you going with this, buddy? But for the most part, I didn't think it was very plausible. I didn't think it was interesting at all. I didn't give it hardly anything for sensibility. And so his actual plot, even though the movie is much better than this, landed number 24 on my list.
All right. I can't say that I fault you for it. Different place on my list, so we'll be discussing it in a bit, but I understand.
Okay.
So what do you have at number 23, sir?
Bringing us to number 23. This one scored very high points on wackiness and low points on just about everything else. And that is From You Only Live Twice. The evil plot to capture Soviet and United States spacecraft from orbit to try and provoke a war between the superpowers. Wacky? Yes, absolutely. Plausible? No. Did he get very much of it complete? Not really. Maybe halfway. Interesting? Meh. Sensible? Not even sort of. And so, while it's still a fun movie, again, these are just ranking the actual villainous plots. Don't take this to mean that the movie is good or bad based on where the plot lands on the list. But for me, not that great of an evil plot is You Only Live Twice.
All right. Now, for me, number 23 is going to start a major theme. Might even call this a family 4-pack. So we'll do that. I'll do this in buckets of 2.
Okay.
So we can continue to snake up as we normally do. My number 23 is toppling space rockets from an open pit nuclear reactor. Threw that part in just for you. From Dr. No. On the one hand, is it plausible? Kinda. Is there a really good reason for it? Not really. It's kind of dumb. And it's just boring. Really boring. The movie itself is much better than the actual scheme involved, because it's more about the personality of the villain than it is about what he's doing, because what he's doing is boring. I mean, if it was happening in real life, would it suck? Yes.
Absolutely.
Would it be on the news all over the place? Yes. However, in the movie, it's just kind of, okay, whatever, toppling rockets, I actually thought it was much more plausible and much more interesting in the book, which we talked about in our last episode. Yep. But just for movie material, no, it's just... And that's really the major thing I have to say about it, aside from open pit nuclear reactor.
I will admit that the open pit nuclear reactor, that phrase, does appear in my description for that particular film as well. And I will also say that we will be talking about it in the very near future. It's not... we aren't going to be waiting too long to talk about Dr. No again. So I guess that brings us to your number 22 then.
Yes, and number 22, continuing on with the theme, space lasers to take back South Korea from Die Another Day. Yes, something else involving space. And basically, my problem with this is one, okay, we have the giant Death Star space laser, for one thing, which I know we've seen somewhere before. I'll think of it probably in a few spots. But then, okay, you have the Death Star, basically, except you can't blow up a planet, but you can blow up a city.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with it? It's not even that the idea of a North Korean colonel with daddy issues wants to take back South Korea and be a hero to his people. It's that you have the freaking death laser, and all you want to do with it is clear a minefield. That's all you want to do with it. You could have done this much more low-key for much less money and probably had better success. Because when you say, what do you think you're going to do? I mean, the satellite has to be placed properly. So it's not like you're not going to be subject to retaliation. Because at some point, somebody's going to shoot that laser down, and it's going to be quick. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, you can't just say, well, I'll use my laser to shoot down whatever comes after me. It's positioning. It's complex. You can't do that. It's a predictable path. And so giant space laser to clear a minefield so you can take back North Korea. I mean, bad movie to begin with, bad execution, and just way, way overkill. Made it really dumb. That's even before you consider the white guy surgery.
I was gonna say, is he gonna? Yeah, I included that as part of the villainous plan, and I will say that it made it a bit higher on my list. Again, I'm not talking top 5, top 10, anything like that here, but it made it a little higher on my list, and I'll explain why when we get there. Although I do agree with everything you said, I'm not claiming anything that you said is incorrect in any way, shape, or form.
So, with that said, what do you say for number 22, sir?
For my number 22, this is a plot that was very plausible, I think, and very sensible, as a matter of fact, as well. But it scored very lowly on everything else. It wasn't wacky, didn't really get that far in its completion, and it was not interesting, really, in any way, shape, or form. And that, for me, that was kind of the biggest weighted one. So if something was not interesting, it fell much further down on my list than, say, something that just wasn't wacky enough or wasn't plausible enough for my liking. And that was in From Russia with Love, the plot to steal the Lector machine, to ransom it back, and, of course, to kill Bond and shame MI6 in a silly sex scandal, all in revenge for him killing Dr. No. Plausible? Yeah, okay. Yeah, steal a cryptography machine. Totally get that. Sell it back to who you stole it from? I don't know about that. I mean, just keep it and use it. But whatever. Either way. Again, I don't see, especially in the movies. Like we talked about in the books, how, yes, Bond is an incredibly sexual creature, but maybe it's not as well known. In the movies, it seems like it's even more well-known. So the idea of scandalizing Bond by showing him having sex with somebody just doesn't do it for me. I'm like, so what? He does that all the time. Nobody cares. So for me, that plot just didn't hit the nail on the head for me. Great movie. Not, again, these places on my list do not correlate with the quality of the film almost ever, except for later on when we get down to the really top of the tier ones, then we get both good movies and good plots. But for this one, great movie. Didn't think the evil plot was that spectacular.
And the audience has been waiting for me to say this. I question your judgment, sir.
Like I said, scored great on the plausibility and even the sensibility scale, but very low in between. So, all right, well, that's fair enough.
So, meanwhile, because it'll take us a while to get to that, what is your number 21, sir?
My number 21 is one that you've spoken about already. This is probably going to be one of our closest matches, I think, thus far, and that is To Disrupt Missile Launch with Atomic Beam from Open Pit Nuclear Reactor from Dr. No. First of all, plausibility. All you need to know about plausibility with the phrase open pit nuclear reactor. Wacky, not particularly, other than the open pit nuclear reactor. The actual plot, okay, so you're basically shooting not necessarily a laser beam, but essentially a concentrated radar beam and disrupting missiles. Okay, not really that wacky. He did get some decent points for completion because he did get close to being completed, but not close enough. interesting. I did give him a little bit, above average marks because it was kind of a fun thing, and sensibility, no, not at all. So that's why it landed number 21 on my list. Dr. Nose.
Dr. Nose?
Sorry,
You're saying that he's
sorry, I had to cough.
rhinoplasty?
Dr. No's plot is what I meant to say before I nearly choked myself. So yeah, Dr. No's evil plot to disrupt missile launches with the help of his open pit nuclear reactor made it to number 21 on my list.
All right. Now, as far as my number 21, a plot that definitely can have one start drinking if one thinks about it. Continuing my family 4-pack of a theme, something that Eric has already mentioned, start World War III by stealing spaceships from You Only Live Twice. Now, okay, fine, we want to start World War III. Why do we want to start World War III? Because we're probably going to make money off of it. I'm assuming that's why Spectre wants to start World War III. It makes the most sense, and I think they mentioned that. But there are lots of easier ways to do it.
Weren't they being paid by a quote-unquote undisclosed country of some sort that wanted to... That's where they were doing it not only for their own benefit indirectly, but also they were being directly paid for somebody? I might have to go
by Blofeld's cat.
Yeah, yes! He's like, you blew that thing up, scared me, and then just held me down while I was trying to get away. Oh, you're going to pay for that.
Yeah, so it's just... There are lots of better ways to start World War III. They've been tried in other movies, which we'll be discussing later. And just wacky? Oh yeah, super wacky. And that's why it actually makes it high enough on my list, because I consider wacky equals entertaining. But other than that, really stupid. Just dumb. Just really, really dumb.
Yeah. As I said, it scored very high on my wacky scale, very, very low on my sensibility scale.
So, yeah, at my number 21, starting World War III by stealing spaceships.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make sense. I mean, just no, in any way.
So that means our number 21s and 23s were exactly flip-flopped.
Indeed.
Cool. That's probably going to be the closest we have to a perfect match. I'd be willing to bet.
And continuing our family 4-pack, my family 4-pack of a theme, ransoming military might with a space laser. At number 20, From Diamonds Are Forever. Again, we have all of the same fundamental problems that were discussed with Die Another Day. Okay, you have the Death Star laser. You're only going to be able to use it a few times before someone figures out how to kill it. Not only that, but in the case of Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever, he's in a known spot. He's at the oil rig, which really, if Bond hadn't cared about Tiffany Case, they could have just taken out with a missile. Without any further problems. Easiest thing in the world to take out. Boom. Done. Finished. And, okay, so you're going to ransom off military... You're not going to have time. It's just implausible, impractical, and just silly. Now, the reason that it makes it so high is at least he's trying to do something a little more sensible than clear a minefield. And because the overall effect on... The movie itself was wacky as hell. So... A plot this silly fits that movie.
Moon buggies.
But just... I'm sorry, go on.
I was just saying moon buggies.
Moon buggy, yes. And massive bathroom worth $10 million at least. But anyway, it just struck me as dumb. So, at number 20, ransoming the military might of the world with a space laser. From Diamonds Are Forever.
I think we may have found one of our biggest gaps thus far. I will say that I question your judgment, sir. And I will explain when we get there.
All right. So what do you have at number 20?
My number 20, even though I love saying the name of this, and it really, the movie is fantastic. Again, not criticizing the movie in this whatsoever, but the main villain's plot is just dumb. And that is the plot to detonate a nuclear bomb on a U.S. Army base in West Germany, thus forcing NATO somehow to withdraw, like that makes any sense, and allowing the Soviet Union to invade Germany. Really? You get all that from one bomb exploding? I don't see that. But, of course, that is the villainous scheme in Octopussy, and I just don't see it. I don't see it happening. I don't see it working. Even if he had managed to blow it up, yes, he would have blown up an airbase. But I don't think NATO would have just been like, oh, well, one bomb went off. We're out. Peace. You have it. You have Germany. Go for it. No, I don't see it working, even if it had been completed. So, no.
1, I question your judgment. And 2, I think you even got the details of the plot wrong.
No, I think...
We will be discussing this much later.
For. Oh, wow. All right. Okay. But, yeah, for me, didn't hit the nail on the head. Fun movie, though. I I mean, Octopussy. Come on now. It's fun to say.
I question your judgment, sir. But I also think that there's a theme that we'll be coming across later that I think both of us feel differently about. But yeah, I question your judgment. So what do you have at number 19, sir?
Well, my number 19 and number 18 are kind of a two-pack. So,
okay.
And rightly so, because it's the same plot. So I'll just throw them both out there. My number 19 and number 18 are Thunderball and Never Say Never Again, or Never Say Never Again and Thunderball. It really doesn't matter. Steal and ransom a couple of nuclear warheads. That's the plot. That's the evil plan. And yeah, okay, it's been done several times in many different movies. I often joke around about they made another remake of this movie when they made Broken Arrow, but essentially, yes, it is somewhat plausible. If you could get your hands on a couple of nuclear warheads and had the arming codes and everything necessary to actually set them off, you could theoretically blackmail the government or extort a government into paying for those, or at the very least, you could sell them to a third party that didn't have nuclear capabilities for a lot of money. So plausibility, it does get high marks. Interestingness, no, not really. It's just kind of meh. But it's fun the way they went about it. But as far as the actual plot itself, I have to say, not too exciting. So they land firmly down there in the bottom third of the list, and you can interchange them 18 or 19, 19 or 18, doesn't really matter. They both scored exactly the same across the board on both on everything. So those are my number 19s and number 18s. Steal a couple of bombs.
I completely disagree with your assertion that they are the exact same thing.
They went about it differently, but
which makes all the difference. But we'll be discussing that later. So, again, I'm questioning your judgment, sir, but that's why we have two hosts.
We're just going to flip each other's lists. Like I said, I think we're going to have, I think that 21-23 flip-flop is probably the closest thing we have to a match.
Indeed, but that's okay. That's part of the fun here. That it's a discussion. It's lively. So, since you did your two-pack, I have to catch up now.
Go for it.
Which brings me at my number 19, and that is having your boss killed and making a power grab by making a fool of the British government. And that would be from a movie that we both really love, Living Daylights. The plausibility factor is almost zero in terms of how did he even think. I mean, he went about elaborately pretending to resurrect Smersh, and while he was at it, threw in this subplot of making a ton of cash so he could buy off the right officials for when Pushkin was killed by the British government because he faked a defection. And it's just interesting how it played out until you got to the loudmouth American, but just overall implausible, kind of dumb, and yeah, it makes no sense. So my number 19 was from Living Daylights, the having your boss killed while making a power grab by making a fool of the British government. So there you go.
Very convoluted, twisted, and doubtful that it could even work, even if you managed to pull it off the way you had originally planned. It seems doubtful that the actual outcome would have been what he wanted it to be. So that's why I had it all the way down on the bottom of my list and didn't make it too high up on your list either.
At least it didn't involve space lasers doing silly things, and at least it felt like somebody tried to put it in the script. So that's why it made it as high as it did. Now, as far as my number 18, I love this movie. I think it's fantastic. I think it's one of the better movies out there. But when you look at just the fundamentals of gamble to get back your lost millions and save your own neck from Casino Royale, it plays really well, but that's not... It's an effect of everything around it rather than the fundamentals of the plot itself. It's like, okay, so you're going to make a really, really stupid financial move, and then to keep everyone around you from killing you for losing their money, you're going to host a gambling tournament, which you can't entirely fix, because really the only way he tries to fix it is to try and off Bond. He just assumes he can beat everybody else. Right. It's just...
Well, to be fair, it does play out that way, where he is able to beat everybody else, and it comes to the point where he has to try to kill Bond just because he realizes, like, oh crap, this guy's good.
But it plays out that way because it has to.
Right.
It doesn't play out that way because it makes sense. And so, like I said, enjoyable movie. I enjoyed how it played out. But, yeah, gambling to get back his lost millions and save his own neck, it still fits pretty well in the bottom third. in terms of overall villainous schemes. So that's my number 18.
All right. I will say that that movie did make it higher on my list, but not extremely. So we'll talk about it again in a little bit, and I'll explain why I gave it a few extra points here and there to kind of bring it up on my list.
All right. So, what is your... Now, should I go on to my number 17, or would you like to go on to your number 17?
Whatever works. You got an itch to say you're 17 right now?
All right. My number 17 fits very solidly on the yawn boring scale. On the other hand, it is incredibly plausible. Mm-hmm. So plausible that I have no doubt that it's already happened. Not necessarily with the same names involved, but pretty much similar.
Okay.
And that's get exclusive water rights to Bolivia via the pet dictator from Quantum of Solace. In other words, industrial complex decides to support a coup and make sure that other people aren't going to fight against it. In other words, buy off the CIA so they can make money. War for oil, you may want to think about, you may not believe in such things. That's fine, but is it a plausible plot? Hell yes, it's a plausible plot. Send battleships down by Panama just to say, hey, if you want to have a coup and take over Panama so that you can suddenly feel generous and give the United States full rights to dig a canal and have full ownership rights of it for a long time, that's fine with us. It's like, so plausible, yes, but Bond movie, boring. So
do not disagree with anything you said there in any way, shape, or form, and we'll briefly touch on it again in very short order.
So that was my number 17. How about for you, sir?
For my number 17, it's another one that I almost thought you were going with this one when you said it was extremely plausible, may have even already happened, and but was extremely boring for a Bond flick. For me, though, the one that was even just slightly more boring than the one that you just mentioned was creating an international drug cartel by smuggling cocaine. Plausible, of course. It happens all the time, I'm sure. Bond movie? No. But still a great movie. Still one that I feel is severely underrated because it's just a good, well-done movie, even though the villainous plot is not that entertaining. And that's License to Kill. That's my number 17.
I understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to fault you for it. I have it at a different place on my list, but I understand.
All right. If we move to number 16 on my list, we have create a drought by damming aquifers in Bolivia, then stage a coup d'etat and sell water supplies back to the new government at grossly inflated prices from Quantum of Solace. Like you said, very plausible. Boring as crap, especially for a modern-day Bond film when we've got so much more. The movie was good. Not as good as its predecessor or its successor, but definitely a good middle film. Bit of a sophomore slump, but still a great movie. But the villainous plot, meh at best. Plausible, yeah, but not interesting, not wacky at all. And they didn't get that far along in the completion process either, so didn't score highly on any of mine. Landed firmly at number 16.
All right. Now, my number 16 would probably have been a better plot for a book, but in terms of a movie, especially with the way that the villain happened to play it out, it just didn't quite do it for me. And that's Nuke Istanbul for oil supremacy in The World Is Not Enough, because, of course, Electra King has daddy issues, thought he was too nice. So she decides to make her own oil pipeline and figures, all these other pipelines end up going through Turkey. So if I just nuke Istanbul, only my pipeline will be left. So I'm really doing this for the money, but I've got these other sideline things, but I'm really doing it for the money, and I am just batshit insane. And you could have done something better with this and made the same plot more interesting. It just didn't play out that way, and in the end, it's thievery. I mean, yes, she's an exceptional thief, as noted in Die Hard. I like that line. You're just a common thief. No, I'm an exceptional thief, and I'm moving up to kidnapping, so you better start to like it. But Nuke Istanbul for oil supremacy is my number 16 from The World Is Not Enough.
All right. I can understand your reasoning. I will say it's made it a little bit higher on my list only because I did give her credit for one more thing, so we'll talk about that when we get up there. But I won't say it's, we're not talking extreme difference in opinions here. I'm not going to totally question your judgment. You might when I explain, but we'll see.
Now moving on to my number 15. again, incredibly plausible. So plausible, it has happened, except it happened in a lesser technological age. And that would be supply pictures to start war for exclusive Chinese cable rights from Tomorrow Never Dies, which is, of course, taking William Randolph Hearst, supplying the pictures and words to start the war for the Spanish-American War so he can sell more newspapers. We just updated it so that Jonathan Pryce's character of Elliot Carver can acquire exclusive cable rights for 100 years in China and therefore make money selling newscasts instead of newspapers. Though newspapers as well, because he was also a newspaper giant, so both things. So
he had full-on media mogul thing going on. So
yeah, probably the last movie you'll see where newspapers were relevant. But just it's really happened, sure, but not exactly exciting. And just even though it's really happened, the idea of we're going to fake starting a war which we have a plan to end right away just so we can sell broadcast rights. I mean, some people would even argue that this kind of thing happens now, but it doesn't make for a really great Bond movie plot. So that's why that's stuck firmly at my number 15 spot.
All right. I will say it made it a little bit higher on my list, only because of the way that I classified things. So we'll discuss. I don't really disagree with anything that you said there. But we'll talk about it in just a little bit. Like I said, we're getting to the we're getting to the midpoint here, so everything here is going to be fairly close. Except I noticed that some of my lower numbers haven't been mentioned by you yet, so that could get interesting.
So what do you have at number 15, sir?
At number 15, this is one that you had at the very, very bottom of your list, and that is to acquire the Solex agitator and sell it to the highest bidder. Yeah, it's boring. Obviously, the man with the golden gun, the major plot is, his fight with Bond, which is awesome. But I gave him a little bit of credit for that being part of his plot as well, because right from the very beginning, you do see that he has this fascination with Bond. I mean, he even has a standee cutout of Bond to play with in his little mirror house, funhouse thing going on. So I consider that killing Bond was always on his agenda. Yes, the Solex agitator was his main, scheme to make money and retire from the business of killing people with one shot for $1 million. But in total, I gave more weight towards the fact that he really wanted to kill Bond, specifically because he really felt that Bond was the one person in the world who he could consider an equal. So I did give him a little bit more points for that, and so that's why I made it higher up towards the middle of my list. And that was Scaramanga's plot from The Man with the Golden Gun.
I have to say I disagree, just because I think the Bond thing was a total subplot. They were mutually exclusive. They had nothing to do with each other. He could have done that completely separately. I couldn't give credit for it.
He definitely could have, but I just felt that it was part of that character's motivation right from the get-go. Like, he never intended to retire. Like, he wanted to steal the agitator. He wanted to sell it and make a ton of money and retire from the business of killing. But there was no way he was going to retire until after he'd killed Bond. So I thought it all tied in together. Like, there's no way that he would have done the one thing without doing the other. Like, he might have killed Bond without doing the agitator stuff, but he wouldn't have done all the agitator stuff and retired without having killed Bond. So that's why I tied it in, and that's why we have two hosts.
See, I don't think he had planned on involving Bond at all, because remember, it was Andrea who involved him, not Scaramanga. Scaramanga could have been without him the whole time. I understand where you're coming from. I just don't agree with you. But like you said, that's why we have two hosts.
Well, forget you, man. That was me dropping the mic. Anyways, no.
So what do you have next, sir?
My number 14, and this one only got extra points because of one particular part, and that was to invade South Korea with the help of Icarus, the space laser, to clear the minefield. Also, totally not racist white guy surgery. I added that part in because I felt that was just too ridiculous to not include, and almost for that reason, I mean, the wacky points went off the chart with the ridiculous white guy surgery. And then, of course, he had the cool little suit thing to control the thing for no reason whatsoever. I mean, like, you could seriously do that with a computer and just a regular keyboard, just a laptop. Heck, a netbook. You don't even need a full laptop. But no, he had like the full
I almost
suit.
thought you were going to say lap dance, which would have been hilarious.
Maybe if somebody had gotten him a lap dance, he would have just been like chill and been like, you know what? I don't really need to do all this. It's cool. Hey, buddy, thanks, bro, for buying me that lap dance instead of that ridiculous.
I was wondering where you were going with the bro thing.
But yeah, I think with the addition of the crazy, totally not racist white guy surgery, and the fact that it was just so wacky, and he got extra wacky points for the fact that he did so much for such a minuscule goal. It's like, I'm going to build this laser, and I can control it with this magic suit, and I'm going to turn myself into a white guy, and yeah, it's all for. I just want to take over South Korea. That's all. I could do all this other stuff. I could literally rule the world if I played my cards right. But no, just South Korea's good. Yeah, that's cool. So that's why it didn't make it extremely high on my list. But the wackiness points and just the crazy factor really did bump it up a bit. And of course, he did get very close to the completion of his goal. He had everything in place. It was ready. He even started destroying the minefield. So while he did not succeed in his ultimate goal, he did get darn close. So he got some extra completion points from me. And that's why it landed at number 14.
I'm shaking my head at you, but I'm just shaking my head. That's
okay.
all.
All right.
I'm not questioning your judgment. I get it. It's just I can't give it the same credit, but I understand.
So what do you have at next spot on your list?
For my number 14, the most plausible version of the start of this plot. Start World War III, okay?
All right. With you so far.
By faking nuclear first strikes. However, there's also a slash after Start World War III / wipe out humanity, because that is also the integral goal of his plot. And that is, of course, from The Spy Who Loved Me. And the reason now, if we were just at Start World War III by faking first strikes, and this had been like Spectre, where the goal was to make money, which we normally think of as kind of a dull, boring goal, it still would have gone higher, because we were starting World War III by a plausible reason. But he's under the assumption that after World War III starts, that everyone will annihilate everyone else, there will be nuclear winter, humanity will die, and his colony of Atlantis will then rule the world. And not plausible result. So that brought it back down to just a little bit below sea level at number 14 for me.
All right. I will say I don't question your judgment, and we will briefly touch on this one in just a few minutes, probably.
Now that brings us to number 13, and again, we're getting to the exceptional thief thing. But at least he's got another motive, and the exceptional thief thing seems to be the afterthought. And that's fry London into the Stone Age after stealing zillions from GoldenEye. And, of course, we have the theft of the GoldenEye prototype for the purpose of sending a gigantic electromagnetic pulse over London, which will fry all of the electronics and send the city basically back to the Stone Age. But first he wants to steal a whole lot of money from London-based banks, and this will, of course, erase all the evidence. So he's got the thievery, but it seems to be more of the afterthought to frying London, because they betrayed his parents, who were Liernt's Cossacks, which I thought was kind of a stretch. But that was because the part was originally written as 006 was supposed to have been the Liernt's Cossack who was betrayed, and he was supposed to be played by an older man, and so on and so forth. They changed their minds. But so the novelty of how London was going to get fried is what brought it up this high. But then you have the, okay, and we're really just going to end up stealing money. And the Cossack thing is kind of weak, but at least we've done well enough to make it almost to the midpoint. We're just right below the midpoint here. So that's my number 13 from GoldenEye.
All right. I want to say I question your judgment. I understand everything that you're saying, though. And I'm sure that part of my placement of that film on my list has to do with my kind of affinity for the film in general. But I'll say we'll be talking about GoldenEye again. It might take a while before we get there.
All right. So what do you have at number 13?
My number 13, and I'm not sure how high this one made on your list. When I placed this one, I was questioning myself. I mean, because this is, we're almost dead center here. And while I want to place this one higher, I couldn't get it any higher on my list. I just couldn't do it. And maybe it's just because maybe I don't love the chickens after all. I don't know. But yes, my number 13 is from On Her Majesty's Secret Service to extort the world with viruses that render crops and livestock infertile. Wacky, yes, definitely. plausible, meh. But yeah, definitely interesting. You got points for interesting, but ultimately, I think the main idea of the plot was just kind of meh. And we all know how the movie turned out as far as it could have been so much better. It just could have easily been so much better. But yeah, I just really, middle of the pack for me. Had enough wackiness and interestingness to get it to the middle, but not enough of anything else to get it any higher.
Fair enough. I will say that I gave it more points than you, but I'm not going to question your judgment, but we will be discussing this a bit later.
All right, then. That's fair enough. I wondered how far up on the list the chickens would take that one.
But as far as my breaking past the midpoint at number 12, this is, and it really is the midpoint, because everything else is somewhat below. There was something taking away from it. And this is the absolute midpoint of you can't do anything wrong. Why? Because as the villain, you are not driving the plot at all. You are doing nothing. You are doing absolutely nothing. The plot is not the plot of the movie. The plot is entirely driven by James Bond. And so number 12, continue being the biggest drug dealer in the Americas. Franz Sanchez in License to Kill. He's just doing what he's been doing all along. So all he's doing is maintaining the status quo. Nothing else. He's got no major evil scheme that's to take over the world or anything. He's already done that as far as he's concerned. So he's just got to sit there and chill and be Franz. And so it's total midpoint. There's nothing bad, nothing great. He's just there.
It's just there.
So, number 12, continue being the biggest drug dealer in North America and South America and Central America from License to Kill.
All right, fair enough. I had that lowered simply because he was so little a part of the actual film, but I understand your reasoning, definitely.
Which moves us on to my number 11, and that is be the biggest drug lord in the Americas from Live and Let Die. And the reason it gets that extra point higher is because he hasn't gotten there yet. It's his ambition. He's trying to do it. And he's doing it with voodoo. And snakes and crocodiles and sharks and tarot cards. So while it's not necessarily a Bondish thing, he does it in Bond style. And I got to give him points for that. And there's some activity there. So that brings it above the idea of just being the biggest drug dealer. He wants to be where Sanchez is. So That's why at number 11, Mr. Big Kananga's version of trying to be the biggest drug lord in the Americas from Live and Let Die.
All right. Well, it's hard to, at this point, anything that I haven't mentioned yet, if you mention it, it's still in the top half, so I can't question your judgment too thoroughly. But I will say that I did give Mr. Big some more points for different things, and we'll talk about it a little bit later.
Fair enough. So then what do you have at your number 11, sir?
My number 11, did we, I don't think we hit my number 12, did we? I know you talked about it already because it was already on your list, but I don't think I said
Did I do 3 in a row?
It doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure I didn't do my number 12, though. I think the last one I talked about was on Her Majesty's Secret Service, right?
So what did you have at number 12? I'm sorry, sir.
It's okay. No, I was just, not a problem. Just keep on rolling. So my number 12 was your number 14, so not a huge difference there at all, and that was From the Spy Who Loved Me. Again, start World War III. And then, in this case, he gets extra points for, I don't just want to start World War III. I want to recreate the Earth in my version of a perfect image. And Atlantis was kind of cool, so you got a couple extra points for that. But other than that, just kind of a very meh, nothing, it had just enough to get it to that midpoint for me, but not enough to take it over that midpoint.
All right.
My number 11 was this one. You've already mentioned you had it way down on your list, which I think I gave a little bit of extra points here, and that was La Chiffre's plot in Casino Royale. I did give him a little bit of points for the beginning of his plot. I included the whole airline scheme that was foiled by Bond as part of his total plot. Yes, the main portion of the movie was him trying to make that money back, but I did give him points for that part of the scheme as well, which was at least interesting. Short sell a bunch of stock, do something bad to that company, make a bunch of money. Well, but Bond stopped you, so now you've got to try to do it some other way. So I really thought of the gambling aspect as almost a secondary, he had to come up with that because Bond had already foiled his main plot. So he got a few extra points for that, not enough to take him very far over the midpoint. So Le Chiffre in Casino Royale makes my number 11.
All right. I understand your reasoning. Not going to fault you for it. I didn't agree, but I understand.
Like I said, I just gave him a few extra points because I included the whole airline stock fiasco as part of his plot, which was much more interesting to me, even though it was foiled much quicker and was really just a setup for the major plot. It had that interesting factor that gave him just a few more points than just the I'm going to win a gambling tournament that I created to make the money back.
I understand. So what do you then have at your number 10, sir?
So, cracking my top 10, and I know you're going to disagree with this, and I even shocked myself when this ended up in the top 10, and this was after several revisions of the list, and it still ended up in my top 10, and for one particular reason, because I gave her extra evil points for one particular part of her plot, and that is From the World Is Not Enough, the seeking to monopolize the oil market. She was doing it by blowing up Turkey. Okay. Yeah, not very interesting. But the one part that gave her extra points that propelled her into the top 10 for me was the fact that she killed her own father to do it. That's cold, and that's villainous right there, and that propelled her way up higher. So I know you disagree, but that's what made my top 10 at the bottom of my top 10, but still my top 10.
I disagree, but I understand. I get it.
So how about your top 10? What cracks your top 10 list?
Well, this is a point where we disagreed already, and my number 10, and I specifically put them in this order. Number 10 is ransoming nuclear weapons from Thunderball. It's become now a classic standard action-adventure espionage plot, but we have to have it start somewhere, so might as well have it start here. And I think it's done reasonably well. Execution is decent, especially for the time. If you're going to do a very basic thing like stealing weapons of mass destruction, ransoming them off, you could do much, much worse than they've done it here. And I like how it played out. I think it worked well. Just solid all around. That's why it makes my number 10.
And I agree that the movie was very well done. I just, like I said, I didn't give it as many points for the actual plot itself because that particular aspect of it I felt was a little less than what the movie in total ended up being. I really enjoy the movie. Thunderball's a great movie. Definitely recommend watching that one.
Now, as far as my number 9, big surprise, ransoming nuclear weapons Redux from Never Say Never Again. Why do I give it more points and why do I think it matters? Because the method they did to get the nukes is different, and it is much more well thought out and much more plausible. Instead of just replacing one guy on a plane, you now have to have somebody match the retinal pattern of the President of the United States. And you have to get the nuclear launch codes. All of it all together. So there's much more detail that went into the stealing of the nuclear weapons. And that's what pushes Never Say Never Again in terms of the villainous scheme ahead of Thunderball for me, why I think it's actually a really clear and important distinction. So that's why I said when I disagreed that it didn't matter, that's why I disagree. It's because the way it was done, there was a lot more detail involved.
Right. And I can see that. I kind of boiled it down to the base of just they're stealing a couple of nukes and ransoming them off, as opposed to this is how they're doing it. So I definitely understand your reasoning there. I just didn't think of it in those terms when I was doing it.
All right. So what do you have at number 9, sir?
At my number 9 is a plot that actually became more plausible when transferred from book to movie than it was in the actual book itself. One of the few times we really, really see, well, I shouldn't say one of the few times, I should say one of the examples of when the writers of the movie said, this doesn't make any sense, let's make this more plausible, even though it's still totally wacky. And
Bet I know what it is.
Gives us one of the single best Bond villain lines, and that, of course, is Auric Goldfinger's plan to break into Fort Knox and irradiate all of the gold to make it unusable for many, 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 many years, thus increasing his own stockpile of gold, which he's been amassing by smuggling over many years, increasing that value quite significantly. I felt like in the book, they wanted, we discussed this on the last episode, he wanted to actually steal the gold from Fort Knox, which Bond points out in the movie how totally implausible that would be. The amount of trucks you would need and the time you would need to get away. So it really wouldn't have worked. But in the movie, they pared it down a little bit and said, well, how about we have him just try to destroy or make useless this gold, thus increasing the value of the gold he already has, since it's already been established that he's got tons of the stuff, literally. So I thought it was much more plausible. It was still fun and wacky because he was still going to use a nuclear weapon. He was still using the cool laser, and he was going to basically kill an entire city just to get in and do it. So definitely top 10 material, and in fact top 9 material for me. Art Goldfinger from, Goldfinger.
Go figure. I can't argue against what you said. We'll be discussing that not in the too distant future. So what do you have at number 8, sir?
Moving on to my number 8 is one that, again, shocked me how high on this list it made, even though the movie is definitely not that great. And as you said, the plot is plausible. So plausible, in fact, that it actually has been done, though not to the extreme. But what really put this one over the top for me was just how wacky the guy was about a plot that was so plausible. It's one of the few times when both the wackiness and the plausibility scale both went very high, and which is hard to do because most of the time you think wacky, you think implausible. But no, for Tomorrow Never Dies, the idea of starting a war with fake news stories, but done in such a wacky, charismatic fashion that it propelled it all the way up to number 8 for me.
Interesting. I didn't agree, but I'm not going to fault you for your choice either. I can understand the argument for it. It just didn't work that way for me, but that's why we have 2 hosts. So I really can't argue against it any more than I already have. It's one of those where I think this is one of the most subjective plots where it either really grabs you or it really doesn't. So,
like I said, definitely the spot on the list does not indicate the quality of the film, for sure. But as far as the villainous plot itself, it had that interestingness to it that kind of, like you said, it just kind of grabbed me a little bit. And then just how wacky he was about it made it even more fun for me. And it was kind of a bright spot in the movie itself for me. So
fair enough.
So,
yep,
go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say this brings us to your number 8, I believe.
Yep. And my number 8, finally, drum roll, or perhaps drumstick roll, because you love chickens. You love chickens. And so we get to ransoming the world's food supply for lots of money and for just being left alone so he can retire to his villainous retreat. That would be the plot of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where, of course, he plans to poison the livestock and the crops of Great Britain and perhaps the rest of the Western world if they don't cooperate. And the frightening thing is, this gets more plausible as a plot every year because we're moving to more homogenized strains of everything. So, like, for example, do you like tequila? If you like tequila, the agave plants that the tequila must be made out of to be called tequila, they're cloned. They are not just wild strains out there, whatever. No, and they're not even just engineered. They're cloned. So if something gets out there that really likes this strain of tequila and eats the hell out of it, likes the strain of agave and eats the hell out of it, no more tequila for you.
Which I wouldn't have a problem with personally, but I know a lot of people who would.
And so with less and less biodiversity in the food supply, this plot from On Her Majesty's Secret Service becomes more and more plausible. And the way that...
Doesn't that go for bananas as well? Aren't most of the bananas that we eat actually cloned? Because they're not wild, truly wild bananas are not even really edible by humans.
Yeah, so it's something that it's plausible, but it's also really, really wacky the way that it's done. And yeah, the movie isn't really that great, but if you think about the mechanics of how he does it, the mechanics are interesting. So you're brainwashing Manchurian Candidate style all of these women to go out and poison the food supply and not be any the wiser of it, not even realize what they're doing. All they think is they love chickens. They love chickens. Or they love wheat. They love wheat. So it's plausible and it's wacky and it's just got that right amount of Bond flavor to it. Execution on screen was so-so, but just the overall idea, it's interesting. Now, the idea of what Blofeld wants to get out of it, which is, you really think the world's just going to leave you alone at that point and pay you come on. That just doesn't make any sense. But the plot itself is interesting enough to make it all the way to number 8 for me.
Okay. Like I said, it's just kind of middle of the road for me, but I can definitely understand your reasoning and not too far off from where I had it. So no judgment questioning here.
All right. Which brings us to my number 007 spot, the Place of Honor. And, of course, that brings us to the plot that so many people think of as the prototypical off-the-wall, over-the-top James Bond plot, because it was really the first one that was off-the-wall and over-the-top, something that Eric mentioned just a very short time ago, nuking Fort Knox from Goldfinger, which, as we discussed in our previous episode, is so much more plausible than the book, and I love how they write in James Bond making fun of the plot of the book, saying how implausible and dumb it was and how quickly the U.S. military would be telling him to put it all back.
Yes.
But they were very creative in figuring out how can we then do something with this? Well, you just irradiate it, make it useless, which also gives Goldfinger financial backing because the Chinese will then want to provide him a nuclear weapon so that they can destabilize the economics of the West. Makes sense. Would work. The background is plausible. The execution is ridiculous, but it's ridiculous in a really cool, fun, interesting way. So that's how I had to give it the Place of Honor at number 007, nuking Fort Knox from Goldfinger.
Okay. Like I said, just had that 2 spots off for me. Again, it has that Bond flavor like you talked about. It has that wackiness to it. You got lasers, you got nuclear weapons, you got tons of gold. Just fun all around. So can't fault you there at all.
So what do you have at number 007, sir?
At number 007 for me, and this is going to sound... Now, I realize the hypocrisy in my own judgment here, so you don't have to point it out. You probably will anyway, but you don't have to point it out. And maybe this propelled higher on my list because the movie itself does have a soft spot in my heart. But for me, the basic villainous plot from For Your Eyes Only, which essentially is very similar to another one I mentioned way down on my list, but I did give some extra points because part of his evil plot is to trick Bond into killing his former friend turned nemesis. So I give them a little bit of credit for that. Maybe it was just execution for me. Maybe it just seemed more interesting to me. But the idea of stealing the device, which would enable them to basically hijack missiles. So you basically have a little bit of Dr. No in there mixed with a little bit of From Russia with Love. You know, you're basically stealing a machine and then you're using it to take missiles off course. So yeah, you got a little taste of this, a little taste of that, both of which I ranked much lower. But for some reason, it made it much higher on my list. So that is my number 007.
Can't fault you for it because you'll notice we haven't talked about it with me yet. So,
but I just so you know, I do recognize the hypocrisy in taking a plot that has bits and pieces from other things I ranked much lower.
Hey, that's what we both do here, right? I mean, we reserve the right to be hypocrites. It's our show. We're allowed.
I'm calling myself out on it, but I'm not apologizing.
So what do you have at number 6, sir? Moving
on to number 6, a fun plot that could have been even more fun if the villain had just been allowed to be him. If they'd have just said, hey, you know what, just turn it on. Turn it up to 11 and go for it. But even without the full walk-in, A View to a Kill was still a fun idea, just crazy enough to be way out there, wacky, not particularly plausible. I'm not saying that they got points for plausibility. They did get some serious points for completion percentage because, damn, they got close. And that, of course, was to trigger a massive earthquake destroying Silicon Valley to allow him to monopolize the microchip market. When you say it like that, it really doesn't sound all that interesting, but I think they pulled it off. And again, that wackiness coupled with how far along they got in it, I'm giving it those extra points, and that is my number 6.
Fair enough, and we'll be discussing this a little bit later as well.
So what made your number 6?
My number 6, I know you're going to question my judgment that it's this low.
Oh.
However, for various reasons, I couldn't put it any higher, but there were also some where I couldn't put it any lower either. And so at number 6, Murder-Suicide M from Skyfall. This is the only villainous plot that completely succeeded. 100% everything he wanted, he got. He did not have to kill Bond. That was not necessarily part of the plot. In fact, what he did to Bond was worse than killing him because he let Bond fail. All Silva really wanted to do was to get close to M and kill her and kill himself at the same time. That's all he wanted. I couldn't put it any higher because the convoluted law-abiding citizen bullshit to get that far was just too convoluted. But in terms of, he succeeded. He's the only one who did. He got everything he wanted. He wasn't around to enjoy it afterwards, but he didn't want to be, because you could tell he was a suicide, but he wanted to take M with him. Mission accomplished. And as a bonus, he made Bond fail. So he got to say, I'm still the best. And Mommy hurt us both. And now look what Mommy did to you. So, number 6, Murder-Suicide M from Skyfall.
All right. You are correct. I am slightly questioning your judgment that it's that low, but still, top 6 is still pretty darn good. So I'm not going to complain too much, and we'll talk about it again in just a little bit.
Now, for number 5, this is part of a 3-pack.
Oh, okay.
But Steel NATO Targeting System from For Your Eyes Only. This is a classic Cold War plot, and nothing really says espionage genre like the Cold War. It was the basis from which Ian Fleming started writing the Bond books to begin with. He was obsessed with it, extremely so. The movies made it something a little bit different, and they tried to take anti-Soviet stuff out of the equation, and yet it was still kind of there, but just solid Cold War espionage plot, utterly plausible. It's played out in some way, shape, or form basically for years in real life. How well it succeeded or not, we probably will never know until at least 100 years from now. But just well thought out, well executed. Yes, it's basic, but it's such a touchstone of the genre. And it's more than just hijacking missiles. It's being able to launch them in the first place. I mean, this is first strike capability without needing the president's eyeball. So to me, it's just such a solid fundamental plot to this genre. I had to pick Steel NATO Targeting System in the top 5 from For Your Eyes Only.
All right. And what's the second part of your 3-pack then? The
second part of my 3-pack at number 4. Now I noticed you're not reading off your number 5 yet.
I'm going to go ahead and let you have you got a 3-pack. Go ahead and go for it, and then we'll catch up.
Okay. My number 4 is one that I was shocked you had so far down. And that is Steal the Lecter, Sell It Back, and Shame Britain from Russia with Love. Again, utterly plausible, perfectly reasonable plot, very, very well executed, and they even tacked on an extra element that was not in the novel by throwing in Spectre as being a third party. So it's not Smersh pretending to have this happen. It's instead Spectre actually doing it and then offering to ransom it back for its own tidy profit. That's kind of cool. And then the shaming Bond, I don't get how you think that is meaningless. Because, okay, so he's not a public figure. You think, so who cares if he's having sex? You watch the news at all in the last 15 years? Seriously? People you don't care about are making headlines for having sex. Do you think anyone actually cares? Even if, aside from his name, do you think anyone cares about Anthony Weiner's dick? No. However, Anthony Weiner sends dick pics. It's all over the news, and it is scandalizing everything for at least a month.
But all it really
now you throw an international
him.
intrigue to that. I mean, remember the Russian spy who posed in nudie magazines and stuff? Come on. This is major news.
I'm going to need a name and maybe some web addresses. No, I'm just kidding. No, I just
totally plausible.
It just, for me, it doesn't seem like it would do. Like they seem to think it's going to shame all of MI6 and it's going to topple them because this one guy was caught having sex with somebody.
It wasn't going to topple them. It was just going to shame them. And I think, especially in the 60s, that's correct.
It just seems to me that when these things happen,
in modern times, it would chew up more news time. It would do less internal damage in terms of their ability to operate. But in a more moralistic early 60s, it would do more damage even then than it would now, even with less exposure.
I guess I have to take it from my own perspective of like, yes, I see these stories, but I also notice that, yeah, Anthony Weiner, everybody saw his dick, but did it shame Congress? No, it shamed him.
It shamed him, and it basically wrecked his career.
But then you look at Clinton. Yeah, he got a little shamed out of it. Yeah, he had to go to court. But did it actually end his career? Not remotely. Nobody cares, really. People make jokes about it, but nobody cares. Nobody thinks less of him as a person, really. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, but the vast majority.
But then you have the Secret Service. They hire prostitutes. You have a lot of Secret Service agents fired, and the Secret Service is under much more scrutiny now.
That was more than just one individual, though, so that makes it a little bit, I don't know. I get your point. I totally do.
Do you know the names? Do you know an exact number? We don't. It doesn't matter. So I think that
if it had been just an individual, that's what I'm saying, is that we would know the name. They would have been fired, just them by themselves, and that's it. It wouldn't have been a big deal. It was because
I disagree that it wouldn't be a big deal. I think it would be it'd be a bigger deal in the media now, but I think it would be a bigger deal in terms of actual harm to the agency then. So I cannot agree with you on the sex scandal being meaningless. I mean, in terms of real life, do I think it's meaningless? Absolutely. Do I care that JFK had to get laid every single day? By his own diary, he says he can't go to sleep without a lay. And it's mostly not coming from Jackie. Do I care? No. If somebody tried to run for office where that was known about them before they ran today, would they even make it past the primary? Not a chance. I don't think your sex life matters. I really don't.
It really shouldn't.
But,
and
I don't think it should, but I think in the real world, in terms of how it plays out, it ends up happening. Yeah. So it doesn't strike me as silly.
Sex is just such a weird subject because some people think of it as the be-all, end-all of everything, and other people think of it as no big. No big whoop. It is what it is. It's a biological function. Whatever. As long as you're not hurting anybody when you're doing it, then go for it. Do what you want. That's kind of the camp I fall into most of the time. It's like, hey, as long as everybody involved is willing and of legal age to make that determination as far as being willing, I'm good with it. And do what you want to do as long as it's not actually interfering with your job. And for the most part, I mean, you look at the two biggest examples of oversexed presidents, for example. Who do you think of? You think of JFK and Kennedy, and JFK and Kennedy, both of them. JFK and Clinton, both of whom were pretty damn good presidents. So it's like, come on.
I don't disagree with that. That on a personal level, I don't think it matters. But in terms of how the world reacts, I think it's huge. I agree it shouldn't be, but I think it is.
All right. Well, and that's fair. Again, that's why we have two hosts, so that my number 22 can be your number 4.
Yes. And what makes this a 3-pack in terms of my 5, 4, and 3 is they're all Cold War centric.
Mm-hmm. I think I have an idea what 3
number
might be.
3, I think you know what it has to be now, and that's no. He wasn't trying to say NATO would pull out of Germany. That was not what he was saying. He was saying force nuclear disarmament of Europe via an accident so he can invade Europe afterwards from Octopussy. He specifically said that, and in the climate, he was correct because there were lots of anti-nuclear demonstrations in the late 70s and early 80s. And all they needed was an excuse to say, okay, these are too dangerous, get these weapons out of Europe. That was plausible. If you have a nuclear weapons accident in Europe, that would be enough for the host countries to say, pull these weapons out, we don't want them here. They're too much of a risk. I don't think that was out of line. And then at that point, earlier on in the film, the general had indeed indicated he had a conventional invasion plan. And NATO could still be there, just without nukes. And especially after anti-nuclear talk from the civilians that had gotten the nukes pulled out to begin with, you couldn't even launch them long range without causing protest from Europe. So I think it's perfectly plausible. I think it's actually very well thought out. So that's why all the way at number 3, force nuclear disarmament of the West via accident, invade Europe after from Octopussy.
All right. Okay. I just don't see it necessarily in the same light. But then again, I also I don't think I'm as big a student of history as you are, so it's very possible that I'm completely wrong and you are completely right, and I'm okay with that. That happens a lot, actually, so I'm not worried about it.
So what do you have for your 5-4-3 or 4-3 year? Yes, 4-3, I think, were at yours.
No, I think I've done my number 5. Because the last one I talked about was A View to a Kill, right?
Yep, so we're at your 4-3. Okay.
No, right, number 5, actually. Because that was my number 6, was A View to a Kill.
Okay.
My number 5, this is one that you had much, much lower on your list. And for good reason. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you said, but for me, the fun factor and the wackiness factor kind of won out on this one, even though it's completely implausible. But it's fun, it's wacky, it's interesting. Sensible? No. I'm not giving it many points on that. But for everything else, create a super laser satellite encrusted with diamonds. This is just fun. I mean, you've got these. You're smuggling diamonds from all over the world to combine and get enough diamonds to make this gigantic laser satellite. And this is, I mean, yes, you see the laser satellite again in the Icarus project, but then it's almost, you're like, meh, whatever.
Well, then it's a blatant ripoff as well. I mean, we know that.
Yeah, exactly. It's already been done, first of all, in the Bond world, and plus, it's not as much of a technological leap anymore, because it is something that, yes, it is not something that can really happen, necessarily, but it's much, much closer to something that could really happen. Whereas when Diamonds Are Forever was made, this is a huge leap of technology that they're going for, to have this satellite that could reflect sunlight and focus it through hundreds and thousands of diamonds and create this laser beam that can destroy any target on Earth. And plus, instead of trying to use it just to clear a minefield and invade South Korea, he's actually going to be able to destroy any nuclear target on Earth and thus be able to sell this to the highest bidder. So again, you have that evilness.
At least until someone blows up his oil rig.
Yeah. Oh, oops.
Or
I'm not
knocks
giving
out the satellite from orbit.
Yeah. I'm not giving him points for execution when it came to his control mechanism of the satellite. Definitely doesn't get any points there, but as far as the fun factor and the wackiness factor, everything else leading up to that evil plot, plus moon buggies. So that is my number 5. Diamonds Are Forever.
I'm looking at you funny, but I suppose I can avoid questioning your judgment.
Well, you had that all the way down at number 20, so
any more than usual, anyway.
Like I said, I totally understand all of your points. For me, it just kind of grabbed me a little bit. That brings me to number 4, which I know has to be, this is the one left on my list that you haven't talked about yet. So at least this one, we're both in agreement, it's a top-notch plot. May not be exactly the same number, but at least we're in agreement that it's definitely top 5 worthy. And that is to destroy all life on Earth by releasing a nerve agent from a space station with zombie lasers.
Zombie lasers!
Pew, pew, pew! And, of course, repopulating with his special chosen people up on the space station. So that, of course, would be the plot from Moonraker as my number 4. And I know you can't disagree with me too much on that one because you haven't mentioned it yet.
True that.
So I guess that would bring me to my number 3, and then we'll both have our top 2 to discuss.
Indeed.
All right, so we'll just jump right in. My number 3 was all the way down on your number 11, and this one I did give him more points for style because of the snakes and the crocodiles and the sharks, especially the sharks. And that is from Live and Let Die, Mr. Biggs planned to become the biggest heroin dealer ever. And I gave him points not just because he wanted to become a big heroin dealer, but because of his method of doing it. Not just with all the animals, of course, but to freely distribute tons of heroin so as to make millions more addicts than there already are, and then start charging. Basically taking that, I'll give you the first sample for free, and then you have to start paying, to an extreme level. And so he got a few extra points for that. And then, of course, all the voodoo stuff and the fun stuff with Solitaire, that just played into it, and that really made it a top 3 spot for me.
Fair enough. Now, for my number 1 and number 2, since if I tell you the number 2, it'll give away the number 1, and that would be anticlimactic, I'm just going to tell you the number 1 right away, and then we'll go on to number 2.
That works.
I assume you want to do the same thing?
Absolutely.
So, for my number 1 favorite evil scheme, because it absolutely, totally wins on the wacky scale, and it's just wacky enough that it could theoretically work. Wipe out humanity with poison from outer space from Moonraker. Perhaps the most grandiose plot they've ever come up with.
And he would have gotten away with it, too, if it weren't for that meddling Bond. Oh, sorry.
And it's just, it's so ridiculous, but it's so much fun. And so well executed. And yeah, it would not be a highly populous humanity. And as we noticed, Drax seems to have decided that humanity should not include boobs. But it's just it's just so fun. It's just zombie lasers, space station, and poison from outer space. It's not like the space lasers, where you have something that doesn't make any sense, where they can't possibly get to it in time. With the Moonraker plot, there was a very real possibility he could have done it and gotten away with it, because the poison would already have been down there before anyone could react to the space station, if it weren't for the fact that Bond had destroyed the stealth generator. So it could have worked. He solved the problem. So it was just so much fun.
Yeah.
So that's why Wipe Out Humanity with Poison from Outer Space from Moonraker makes my number one favorite evil scheme.
All right. And so if you've been paying attention, everybody knows what your number 2 is, but just for those who aren't tallying them like I am, tell us your number 2.
Number 2 is Wipe Out Silicon Valley via Earthquake from A View to a Kill, which takes the idea from Goldfinger of wiping out Fort Knox via nuclear weapon to irradiate all the gold, and takes it even wackier, more plausible, and more fun. Because, okay, he's going to wipe out Silicon Valley, so 1, it makes him rich. 2, causes economic instability in the West. Hey, cool. Even though he's not with the KGB anymore and they don't like it, they're still going to be happy with what he does. And then, of course, he's using an earthquake. He's manually creating an earthquake. And the way he's going about it, it's not scientifically implausible that it could happen. In fact, there's always rumors that this can happen already with a single weapon. Whether or not they're true depends on your favorite internet conspiracy theory. They really did try to design a weapon that could do this during World War II, and they partially succeeded. Not to the point of a full-on earthquake, but still. So it's got just enough plausibility to not be totally ridiculous, and well executed, well thought out, and fun. Even though I would hate for this to happen, because the San Francisco Bay Area is my favorite place on Earth, so I don't want it to be irradiated and knocked down and destroyed and flooded and crap. That's not cool. But in terms of a movie plot, it's great. So, number 2, Wipe Out Silicon Valley via Earthquake.
Plus, he was doing it in style. He had the blimps and the bombs and everything. And would you have put it at number 1 potentially if they had given Christopher Walken the go-ahead to go full Walken on us?
I think there is a distinct possibility that could have happened.
That movie could have been so much better if they just been, we got this guy who plays crazy so well, but let's hold him back. Let's tell him to tone it down a bit. No, they should have given him the go-ahead. Just be like, do you do you, and we'll make the movie around you.
If they just let him go ahead and be crazy, it could have worked, but we'll never know. So that brings us to your top 2.
All right, my top 2, and I will go do the same thing as you, go from number 1 to number 2. My number 1, which I was surprised was as low on your list. I'm glad it did still make your top 10 at least, which my number 3 and number 2 did not make. But my number 1 was Silva's plot from Skyfall. And for many of the reasons you said. First of all, because he did complete it. I think the only thing that potentially he might have wanted to accomplish would be to have killed Bond, but he wouldn't have wanted Bond to die until after he had failed anyway. And so for the most part, it wasn't a necessary component. His big plan was to humiliate M, to damage MI6, and to kill M. And, yes, he took himself out in the process, but I don't think that was ever not part of his plan. Just like you said, I think, at least 99%, if not 100% of his plan was complete. I think the only thing that he maybe would have, if he had actually successfully killed Bond as well, but it would have had to have been after he made Bond suffer the humiliation of failure first. So honestly, I can't find any fault in it. Like you said, yes, a lot of things did have to come into place in order for him to get that far, and it did seem a little contrived at places, but I kind of chalked that up, as we discussed when we talked about Skyfall before in a previous episode. I kind of gave that to him as that's proof of how badass he is. And yeah, they did take it to the extreme. They had to make him really badass, but honestly, would you have wanted a villain who wasn't that badass to kill M? I mean, if somebody's going to take him out, I want it to be the best of the best.
But the best does not involve being so implausible that you're a unicorn.
But I love unicorns. They're so pretty. They got that one big horn.
You're into the big horn.
trying so hard not to quote Orgasmo right now because that would be inappropriate for our main base of listeners. But for those of you out there who have seen Orgasmo, you know exactly what I'm thinking of right now. But yes, Silva's plot from Skyfall still manages to make my number one, and that's mostly because part of it is because it's so implausible, yet he pulled it off. So that gives him extra points in my book. But that's my number one. My number two, the only movie I haven't mentioned yet, and that, of course, is 006, taking control of the GoldenEye satellite weapons, which they were smart enough to have multiple of, since obviously one could be destroyed, one could be shot down, or in the case of the particular type of weapon that they're dealing with, you pretty much have to destroy it in order to use it. Since you're creating an EMP by detonating a nuclear weapon in orbit, it kind of self-destruct mechanism there going on. So they did need multiple weapons, and he had multiple weapons. And he came so darn close to completing his mission as well, before, suffering the Sean Bean effect and not really making it.
He made it through so many sharp flicks, though.
He did. But unfortunately, he didn't quite make it all the way in this one. He did come darn close, I think, and he does get points for simply being in proximity with Famke. I mean, that just you automatically get some points for that in my book. But I think his plot was interesting enough. He did have the revenge thing going on, but when you did boil it all down, he kind of, he was after the money. Yeah, the revenge stuff was just kind of secondary, which, had that been the primary goal, he could have actually overtaken Silva in this list for me. But since his primary goal ended up just being about money, it doesn't quite reach number one for me. But number two, definitely.
All right. I'm kind of surprised, actually, because I know that you're not very much into the money motive. But then again, it is GoldenEye. It
is, yes. Those two movies, GoldenEye and For Your Eyes Only, kind of hold that special place in my heart that no other films can truly live up to. We talk about favorites not necessarily being the best, and those are great examples for me. GoldenEye is still my favorite Bond movie, even though I love Skyfall and Casino Royale. They're both easily technically superior films. I mean, by any objective scale, you can look at them and say these are definitely superior films. But that doesn't change the fact that GoldenEye is still my favorite. One of my favorite all-time movies, and definitely my favorite Bond film. Just has that special place right here.
Understandable. So, any other thoughts you have on our lists of evil schemes?
No, not really. I was not necessarily surprised that our lists were so different. I mean, that usually happens. 9 times out of 10, our lists are different. Sometimes we'll hit one that's the same, or a couple that are very close and flip-flopped. Like on this one, I think our 21 and 23s flip-flopped, which are very close together, so not that big a deal. But other than that, it was a huge disparity between our lists. I think the only other one that came close was Moonraker. I had it number 4, you had it number 1. Other than that, everything was hugely different. So, good list.
I admit I was surprised at just how wildly we were off each other, but that's why we have two hosts. I think it makes it interesting. I think it makes it fun. And there's no such thing as a right or wrong answer. I mean, unless you're saying what's the best Bond movie and your answer is Die Another Day, then you're wrong. But it's...
You, sir, are incorrect. Leave my site.
But beyond that, there's no such thing as a right or wrong answer on any of these lists. So I think that this disparity is actually kind of healthy, because if we agreed on everything, what fun would that be for our listeners, right?
Exactly. I concur, because that would be... Oh, wait, no, I don't agree. We're going to have a fight about this. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it wouldn't be any fun if we were just like, hey, we're going to give our list. Oh my gosh, they're the same again. Ha ha. No.
So that brings us to one more top 007 list, which we decided to do afterwards, because by the nature of the list, we have to talk about the evil schemes. So the evil schemes kind of have to get out of the way. That would be the speech list. And it surprised me as I was working on mine, because this is something we all think is so fundamental. When the villain gives the speech describing what the evil plot is, it turns out that the majority of Bond movies don't really have this.
It's one of those things where the stereotype doesn't necessarily live up to the truth. It's something that it does happen occasionally, but it's definitely not an every single movie has this moment type of thing. And when you think of Bond movies, that's what you think of, even though as I was going through and trying to compile this list, I don't know how many you actually put together, but I only had, let's see, I've got my top 7, and then I think I've got 4 or 5 that didn't actually make the top 7. So out of 24 movies, we're only talking about 12, less than half that actually had something that I would consider this monologue, and I'll admit to even stretching on some of them.
And I'll tell you, I did the same thing, and in fact, and this is something that I did mention, because, of course, Eric and I come up with our list totally separately. We don't talk about them beforehand, except when we discuss the parameters. We don't discuss what's going to be on it, but I found that there were so few that had the actual monologue that it was stretched to allow what basically amounted to be the vision statement. So if the villain gives a speech that basically explains who he is and why he's doing what he's doing, not necessarily giving away the whole of his scheme, that also counted. And I think that was especially important for one thing on my list, because there are some movies where there's never even a vision statement, there's never a speech, and either the explanation of the plot is split between 2 or 3 different monologues, or Bond is the one who makes the speech.
Right.
So,
and I didn't count any of those, I don't think.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting small list. I don't think I could have made it more than a top 007. So would you like to start, or shall I?
Let's see. You started the last one, so I'll go ahead and start this one. My number 007 on list of villainous monologues is from one of my favorite movies that we just discussed, GoldenEye. When Alec Trevelyan, a.k.a. Janus, a.k.a. 006, is explaining what he plans to do, talking about it's not just erasing bank records, it's everything on every computer in Greater London. The United Kingdom will re-enter the Stone Age. Wah, ha, 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 ha. It was a fun moment. Definitely not the best that we've ever seen in a Bond movie, and it's quickly shut down with, wait a minute, you're actually just stealing money, dude. But at that moment, it was kind of interesting, and you saw that revenge, that villainous gleam in his eye when he's like, I'm doing all this bad stuff because I hate London, I hate England, ha 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 ha. Didn't end up really being that way, but it was still a good moment. So that is my number 007.
All right. Now, my 007, we always hear it in one particular fashion, but that's not the actual speech. It's the one that follows the one that we always talk about. So, while yes, you love chickens. The actual plot is described in, I will tell you what to do, I will tell you what to say. Yes, it's Blofeld's final instructions to the girls when they're opening their Christmas presents, where he's explaining what they have to do. That, I thought, was well done. From Her Majesty's Secret Service. The hypnotic, I will tell you what to do, I will tell you what to say. Take out the compact at midnight. Don't ever use the atomizer until I tell you. And of course, not included in that particular speech, you love chicken. So it's the extension of you love chickens, the I will tell you what to do, I will tell you what to say, from On Her Majesty's Secret Service at number 007.
All right. I will tell you that movie did make my list. I went with a different part, though, so that's interesting. But we'll get there.
All right.
So what about your number 6?
My number 6 is Dr. No's personal vision statement from Dr. No. This is the one that kind of set the template for the monologuing villain, $1 million. You were thinking how much it costs. And then he goes on to describe who he is, and with very little prodding from Bond. So yeah, Bond interacts with him, but it's still more of a monologue than a conversation.
Right.
He explains how he became who he is and why he's this master criminal and how Bond is a stupid policeman. So Dr. No's little personal manifesto bio from Dr. No is my number 6.
All right. I can definitely see that one. I will admit that one did not make my list. It kind of didn't make the cut when all was said and done, but good choice.
All right. So what do you have at number 6, sir?
For my number 6, I had one again. This one was not ranked very highly on your villainous plots list. It was ranked a little bit more highly on mine, and I may have given him points for shark use. I don't know. It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe subconsciously I gave points for shark use. But that was Mr. Big in Live and Let Die, when he was talking about when the number of addicts in the country doubles, I will start to market the acres you have blundered into, and basically going on and on about how he's going to take over the heroin industry in the United States. And not only that, but he's also increasing that industry himself by creating more addicts, by giving it away for free. And I thought that was interesting enough and wacky enough to make it onto this list. And that is my number 6.
Can't say I fault you for that at all. What about your number 5, sir?
Moving on to number 5. Again, could have been higher on the list if they'd let the actor just completely go with it. But that would be Christopher Walken in A View to a Kill, when he was talking about, we are now in a unique position to form an international cartel. I can't do Walken, otherwise I would try, but everybody knows that I don't do voices. So, but he goes on and he says, there is one obstacle, Silicon Valley in San Francisco. That speech for me, it was kind of a good moment, and again, it was probably one of the few moments when you almost got the full Walken, but not quite. It would have been much better had they let him go. That's my numero 5.
I will say that one's not on my list. It could have been, but the reason it's not is because the speech gets cut off just before he explains what the plot is going to be, and it gets finished later by Tanya Roberts. That just kind of put all the hydrogen out of the blimp for me. So I understand, but that's why I couldn't put it on there, because it gets cut off just when it's getting good and it's finished by somebody else named Tanya Roberts. But I understand. Now, my number 5, I know you'll have no disagreement with, because it is Mr. Big, who's going to wait until the number of addicts in the country has, say, doubled. And, of course, that will take his competitors and drive them completely out of their minds and then out of the business. It's just the way he just so swaggeringly, confidently explains what he's doing. Just perfect. Just perfect villain. I'm in command. I'm in control. And there's nothing you can do about it. I got to give the swagger points to Mr. Big from Live and Let Die.
Definitely can't fault you there. Like I said, my number 6. So it was definitely a good one. It was one of the ones that I think of when I think of a Bond villain monologue. Even though maybe a lot of people don't necessarily jump to that one, but I definitely think about it. So there you have it.
That brings us on to my number 4, and that would be, and delivered in very theatrical, if deadpan fashion, but very theatrical, because we have the whole gathered group, we do the moonlighting, and then Drax presents his manifesto on the space station, where he's describing how he's got the Ubermenschen and he's going to destroy the world and then remake it in their image. So, Drax's manifesto
a new world
from Moonraker.
Number 4, you say?
Yes.
What a coincidence we have on our hands here. I think this might be out of the 3 lists. That is the first one that has been spot on, dead exactly the same, because my number 4 is Hugo Drax from Moonraker. Yes, it's fantastic because of the way he delivers it. That's one of those times where you wouldn't want a Walken-esque type of delivery to this one. This one is perfect the way he does it, and it's special in the fact that it is a spectacularly wacky plan, and he just delivers it just so deadpan and just so perfectly, like it's totally normal. Like everything he's saying is just like, oh yeah, I get it, totally cool. Even though it's completely wacky plan. A rebirth,
right.
A new world. Yes, Moonraker.
Wow,
good stuff.
I actually
good stuff.
agreed with something. I'm more surprised now than I would have been when we started the show. So.
What's next? Cats and dogs living together? Human sacrifice?
Lucas, it wasn't my fault, I swear to God. If you know what movie that was from, bonus points to you. Meanwhile, what do you have at number 3, sir?
Number 3, this is the one that I have, movie you've already mentioned, but I went with a different speech. I went with the one that was actually telling Bond what the total outcome of his plan would be, and that is, of course, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, when he's talking about total infertility in plants and animals, not just disease in a few herds, Mr. Bond, or the loss of a single crop, but the destruction of a whole strain forever. That to me was the moment when it was like really coming to, this is what's happening. I admit that the other one that you mentioned, when he's giving his final instructions to the girls, was also a pretty powerful scene. Honestly, I think the Blofeld scenes in that movie are pretty much the best of any of them. Maybe it's just the voice. I don't know. But we both agree that the movie is not particularly great, but I would say that the Blofeld performance in that movie is probably the high point. And, of course, the chickens. So that is my number 3 from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Blofeld explaining to Bond the outcome of his plot.
All right. my number 3, which I somehow suspect will be higher on your list, just call it a guess, is, and this is a rare case where the monologue is the first thing you see of the villain.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that would be Silva's rant from Skyfall, where it's just perfectly delivered by Javier Bardem. When he's walking down, you just see this kind of indistinct figure coming down the elevator, walking down the length of the world's crappiest server room until he finally gets up to Bond, and he's telling this long story, which is borrowed slightly from a James Clavell novel called King Rat. Not entirely, but a little bit. And in the course of this introductory monologue, even though he's not saying exactly what he's doing, because Bond already knows a lot of what he's doing,
mm-hmm.
but it does explain his entire philosophy, why he's doing it, and what he expects to happen next. So that long story of the 2 rats that are left, and there's only one thing for the 2 rats left to do, either eat each other or turn on their master. What are they going to do? This is how I became who I am, how you became who you are. And it's all Mommy's fault. Mommy has been very bad. So, the Mommy has been very bad rant from Skyfall is my number 3.
All right. Yeah, definitely can't fault you for putting that on the list, and we'll talk about it again here in just a couple of moments. So that brings us to our top 2. My number 2 is actually Art Goldfinger giving his fantastic speech in his fantastic room with all the bells and whistles and the fun stuff. Just because, I mean, come on, that room in itself is worthy of a spot on this list, even if he didn't say a word in it. Hey, what's that map doing here? I will admit he had the best lines in that scene because the other people did not. Hey, where'd that map come from? What's that map doing here? That was the best part. But yeah, obviously that really kind of sets the tone for the villainous monologue. No, he wasn't directly giving it to Bond because he didn't know that Bond was watching at the time, but it still kind of sets the tone for just the villain just being like, I'm going to lay everything out right now in one speech. And so that's why it makes my list at number 2.
Now, as far as my number 2 goes, and it's very specifically this instance, and it's a visual that propels it so high on this list, along with the audio of it and the content. And that is the ransom demand from Never Say Never Again, where Ernst Stavro Blofeld, in the voice of Max von Sydow, which you can only really equal by casting him as Morgan Freeman instead, otherwise it's dead heat, calmly explaining, 1, that he's got the nuclear weapons. 2, how he got the nuclear weapons. How you can verify that. He says Spectre, and it says what it stands for in just the most awesome voice ever, which I never do justice to, but I always want to. Special executive, etc., etc. And the speech is being heard by the United Nations, but the thing that really, really props it up to the top, almost, because it's still only at my number 2, is, so now we've done the terrorism and extortion, and if you don't pay up, and then on the screen you just see the white cat licking its paws, just doing the grooming thing, and suddenly it looks up, revenge, nuclear mushroom cloud, innocent cat licking paws, mushroom cloud, awesome.
To be fair, that's pretty much what I think of when I see a cat, because they're evil.
It actually reminds me of my favorite bad movie video cover ever. There's a movie made in 1954. It's really bad. I mean, really, really, really bad. It was originally called, I think it was Monsters A Go-Go. Not quite sure. Something real close to that. However, it was retitled Nasty Rabbit. And the VHS cover for that was this cute little bunny rabbit with a mushroom cloud behind it.
Awesome.
And it's like, I don't care what this movie's about. I want to see this. And so when you combine Max von Sydow's silky smooth voice explaining how he's extorting the world, and then cat, pause, nuclear explosion, I had to have, and I even called, when I put the short form of the speech in my list, I call it Nuke Cat.
Nuke Cat, all right.
From Never Say Ever Again is my number 2.
All right. And how about your numero uno, the top of the list?
Well, that one, I'm surprised it was not numero uno on your list. This is the one thing I thought we would agree on.
Uh-oh.
And that was the humanity has excelled at every endeavor, except crime! Good guy Goldfinger in the ultimate villain man cave, giving the prototypical James Bond villain monologue. I mean, yeah, we had the dry run with Dr. No that I mentioned earlier, but in terms of the totally wacky over-the-top, here's the map, here's everything, I'm going to point out every little dinky detail. Just so much awesome there. All that's missing is a white cat and a nuclear explosion. And otherwise it would be perfect. So, except Clyde from Goldfinger is my number one. I'm shocked it wasn't yours. I can't totally fault you because it's at your number two, but damn, dude.
If only it had, like, he would have, of course, had, like, a gold-colored cat, as opposed to a white cat. But other than that, yeah. And he actually had the nuke as well, so that would have worked. Well, definitely a great scene, and for me, only barely topped by the one that you previously mentioned from Skyfall. That is my number one, and that is just because it's just so perfect. It tells you, the reason I like it so much is because it tells you everything you need to know about the character without him actually saying the plot that he's trying to do, without him actually putting it into direct words like, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. No, instead he tells this weird story in such a perfect way that you just feel unease while you're hearing it, but at the same time, you can't turn away. I mean, yeah, Bond's tied to a chair. He can't turn away. He can't stop listening, but you wouldn't want to. He's telling you a story. You want to hear the end. You want to find out what's happening. And that whole scene, even as it plays out when he's done with his original speech and he starts to talk to Bond in a more conversational tone, that whole scene for me is just absolutely wonderful, except for the extremely dusty and no ventilation or air conditioning server room, which kind of bugs me on a technical level. But we're forgetting about that for right now. That scene is brilliant to me, and while it's not the traditional monologue of a villain telling you what they're about to do necessarily, it's most definitely a monologue. I mean, he's going in there, he's the only one talking, he's telling, he's speaking directly to the villain, to the hero, but also to the audience, and for me, it's just damn near perfect. So that's my number one, Silva's rant from Skyfall, the rat story.
I figured that if it wasn't going to be your number two, it was going to be your number one. I knew it was going to make your top two. I just thought it would go in the other order, but that's cool. I understand. So, anything else you want to talk about this Megalomania episode before we round things off?
No, I was thinking briefly when you were mentioning how awesome it would be to have Blofeld voiced by Morgan Freeman, and I was thinking that, they do have the rights to Blofeld and Spectre back now, and there's no reason that Blofeld has to be a white guy. So there's no reason at all that couldn't actually happen, that we couldn't see a Bond movie with Morgan Freeman playing Blofeld. Even if we never see the character, if we just hear him, it'd be fine by me.
Indeed. And, I would be totally cool with that. I think it would work. So come on, Morgan, get a cat.
There you go. Yeah,
you want to.
Get a cat and pet it nicely and all that fun stuff. So I guess my one question to you would be, since we discussed that basically you could pretty much split it in half. About half of the movies have some form of villain monologue that we could tie to this. We're talking about 24 movies, and I only pulled 12 from the list that I thought qualified. Do you think that they should continue to do that, to keep that at a pace of about half of the movies have one and half don't? Or is this something that you'd like to see in more movies, more Bond movies? Should this be a staple?
I think it's very much dependent on the story. Some stories really, really lend themselves to it. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, one that definitely lent itself to it and had one, it just didn't make my list, was Tomorrow Never Dies. I mean, Elliot Carver is a journalistic megalomaniac and a narcissist. Of course he's going to give the speech because he needs an audience. Yes. If he did not give the speech about what he was doing and why, that movie wouldn't have worked. It would have been wrong. The character would have been off.
Right.
So a movie like that absolutely needs one. Whereas For Your Eyes Only, you don't really need the villain to say anything. And that was one of those where it was really the good guys, as far as the viewer's perspective, who knew what the plot was and kind of told you what was going on. Christados didn't need to tell you that. General Gogol didn't need to tell you that. So that one, you don't really need the full-on monologue. So I think it depends on which story you're telling, and the mechanics of that story will tell you whether or not you need it.
I can definitely agree with that. I would say it's something that I like, but I wouldn't mind seeing them go more towards the direction like they did in Skyfall, where you have that monologue, but it's not necessarily telling you what the plot is. Like, I'd rather just see more into the villain's psyche than into their actual plan from the monologue.
Which is kind of what we had with Dr. No, really, when we started. So
yeah,
it's a full circle thing.
full circle. Cyclical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was old is new again. Something like that. I don't know. But yeah, that's where I'd like to see them go with it. It doesn't have to be every single movie. But if they do choose to put it in there, it either needs to very much fit the character like you discussed with Carver, or I would rather see it be something that we see into the mind of the villain without seeing into, without being able to actually write down, here's the evil plot, now we can foil it.
Yeah, and of course, we all know that you do want to see sharks in all the new movies. We know that.
Of course. I mean, come on now. Sharks. They don't have to play a big part. They don't have to even be a part of the movie. Just, have one swim by,
So basically, when James Bond fell through the ice in Skyfall, or when he was shot down in the river, you'd want to see sharks floating by in the water.
It would be tough to fit them in, because you know that sharks don't typically hang out in ponds like that, but
you would have wanted to anyway.
I would have been okay with it. Yeah, some people would have been like, no way, that's horrible. Why would you want a shark to show up in the pond like that? Because it's a shark, man. I don't want him to get Bond. It doesn't even have to, like I said, doesn't even have to be a major part of the thing. Just, have it be there. Anyways.
So that'll wrap up our Megalomania episode for 7/7, no matter what side of the pond you're on. We're glad you stayed with us for it. You can, as always, find us on the web at hermajestiespod.com. You can email me directly at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com and find me on Twitter at cinemaotr.
And I'm on the Twitters also at Eric J. Dewey, or you can email me, eric@hermajestiespod.com. And if you're on the Twitters, don't forget to follow the show at Her Majesty's Pod on the Twitter. And, of course, we also have the website up at hermajestiespod.com. Feel free to drop us a comment on the episode there, or go back and check out some of the previous episodes. We keep the full archive there, so you might not see everything on Stitcher or iTunes because they cut them off after a certain number of episodes. I think it's either 10 or 25, depending on their mood. But we're past 25 episodes, so if you want to go back to the older ones, visit our site. That's where they'll be found.
Indeed. And as far as what you can look forward to next time, this is something that started off in my head as a joke, and then figured, nope, we're going to do this. So it's fun for the whole family. Yes, James Bond is very much an adult franchise, but it has also been marketed to people of all ages, and that includes through video games, one of which we'll be discussing, and through James Bond Jr. We will be discussing the first 7 episodes of the James Bond Jr. cartoon. Go ahead and make your drinks now. You're going to need them. And then we have one more special surprise for you, which will be a unique little experiment on our part, but we'll let you find that out for yourself when you tune into our next episode of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Fern. Meanwhile, I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you have been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast on the Four-Eyed Radio Network.
This has been another great presentation by the Four-Eyed Radio Network. You can find more information at foureyedradio.com.